Hey dreamers, tonight we venture into the realm of gods who existed long before the first civilizations carved their stories into clay. We're stepping into a world where the very fabric of reality was woven by divine hands, where the space between sky and earth was not a given, but a conscious act of creation. Before time had a rhythm, before humans walked the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, there existed a pantheon of beings so powerful, so deeply woven into the fabric of existence itself, that their names have echoed through 5,000 years of human history. These are the Anunnaki, the great gods, the divine assembly, the architects of order itself, and tonight we begin our journey with the oldest and most distant of them all, An, the sky god, the supreme father of the cosmos. Then we venture deeper into the storm, where Enlil, the wind itself made manifest, stands as the god who dared to reshape creation with his own divine hands. Their stories are not simple tales of heroes and villains, but rather profound meditations on power, transformation, and the nature of cosmic order itself. But before we dive into these ancient tales, I want to invite you to settle into this story with me. Take a moment to like the video if these journeys bring you a little closer to rest. It's always a pleasure to see our community of listeners, so let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. We're all connected by these threads of myth and wonder, and your presence here makes this moment real for all of us. Now, let's begin with understanding what the Anunnaki truly were. The name itself carries profound meaning. Those who came from Anu, or more literally, offspring of Anu. In the earliest Sumerian texts, inscriptions carved during the reign of Gudea, around 2144 BCE, the Anunnaki are described as the most powerful deities in all the divine pantheon. They were not gods of a single moment or of a single city, though each great city had its own patron among them. Rather, the Anunnaki represented something far more fundamental. They were the Great Council, the divine assembly that gathered in the heavens to decide the fates of gods and mortals alike. Their numbers were not always consistent, which itself tells us something profound. Sometimes, in later Babylonian texts, they are counted as 300 in the heavens and 300 more in the underworld below. Most frequently, we encounter them as the 7 judges, powerful, impartial, and utterly unforgiving in their pronouncements. The Sumerians who worshipped these gods understood something we often forget in our modern world. It must be upheld by those with the power to shape reality itself. And this was the function of the Anunnaki. They were the great gods who decreed the fates of mankind, who allocated the seasons, who determined the rise and fall of kingdoms, and who presided over both the heavens above and the shadowy realms below. But every divine assembly must have a head, a father figure, someone whose authority supersedes all others. And in the ancient Sumerian cosmos, and sometimes spelled Anu in the Akkadian tongue, a language that would later influence Mesopotamian religion, existed at the very pinnacle of creation. His name means simply sky or heaven, and yet that simple name carries within it the weight of absolute authority. Picture this. At the beginning of all things, before the world had form, before light had separated from darkness, there existed only the primordial sea. The ancient texts call her Namu, the mother of all things, the embodiment of infinite potential and formless becoming. From the waters of Namu came the first conscious act of creation, the separation of sky from earth. And from that separation came An, the personification of the heavens themselves. In the oldest Sumerian creation accounts, preserved on clay tablets that have survived millennia of dust and decay, rather, Namu gives birth to An with the same inevitability that morning light banishes night from the sky. An becomes the sky, and in becoming the sky, he becomes the supreme reality upon which all other existence depends. To the ancient Sumerians, An was so fundamentally identified with the sky that the same Sumerian sign used to write his name was also used to mean sky in general, and even God itself. He was the principle of the heavens made conscious, the cosmic principle given form. Imagine standing in the ancient city of Nippur, where the great ziggurat of Enlil rises toward heaven like a stone ladder. Now look upward, truly upward. Beyond the temple towers, beyond the reach of human hands. That infinite dome, that realm of eternal stars and perfect order that was An. To the Sumerian peoples, An was not merely a god who lived in the heavens, but the heavens themselves, given consciousness, given will, given authority over all things below. The highest heaven, composed of precious stone tradition, says it was a reddish stone, as beautiful and distant as the evening star that was the realm of An. And from that highest dome, An looked down upon all creation with an authority that no other deity could challenge. It was the very ceiling of existence, the ultimate frame within which all other reality operated. But here is where the story becomes truly interesting, because An's greatest power was not his ability to command or destroy, but his authority to legitimize. An was regarded as the source of all kingship, both divine and mortal. When a ruler ascended to the throne of Uruk or Lagash, or any other great city of Sumer, they did not truly hold power until An had given his approval. The Sumerian kings understood this with an almost religious intensity. They were not kings because they were strong or clever or well-born. They were kings because the cosmic order, flowing from An himself, had designated them as rulers. To speak without authority from An was not merely to defy a ruler, it was to defame the very structure of existence itself. Some gods possessed greater day-to-day power than An did. Enlil, as we shall soon see, was far more active, far more engaged in the affairs of gods and humans alike. Even Enlil, despite his prominence and his fearsome reputation, existed within the framework of law that An had established. An was the authority from which all other authority flowed. He was, in the deepest sense, the cosmic principle of legitimacy itself. Which brings me to ask you personally, if you could design an ideal authority figure, whether a leader, a mentor, or even a god, what qualities would they need? For me, it has to be an interesting combination. Tremendous power, yes, but coupled with wisdom enough to use it sparingly, and embodies this principle perfectly in Sumerian theology. His distance from daily affairs is not a weakness, but a profound strength. Now, what was An like? Here we encounter one of the most intriguing paradoxes in ancient Sumerian theology. An was the supreme god, the father of the cosmos, the source of all legitimacy, and yet he was rarely actively worshipped. The Sumerians built magnificent temples to Enlil in Nippur, where elaborate ceremonies and priesthoods maintained constant devotion. They created elaborate rituals for Enki, the god of wisdom and water, performing sacred dramas and invocations. They sang hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war, with a passion that fills even our modern ears with the urgency of their devotion. But An remained distant, serene, almost indifferent to the frantic activities of both gods and humans below. This was not disrespect, rather it was an acknowledgement of his nature. An was so far above the daily concerns of creation that he did not need constant appeasement or constant prayer. His authority simply was. It did not depend on flattery or sacrifice. It simply existed as unchanging and eternal as the night sky itself. The logic was elegant. Why would the supreme principle require your constant attention? That would suggest it needed something from you, and what could the sky possibly lack? In the earliest texts, An's origins are not explained. He simply exists as the foundation upon which all other existence rests. Yet in later Babylonian accounts, particularly in the epic poem known as Enuma Elish, a more complex genealogy emerges. Even An, it seems, had parents. Anshar and Kishar deities whose names mean horizon and represent the circular boundary between sky and earth gave birth to An. But whether An emerged from primordial waters or from divine parents, the essential truth remained unchanged. An was the sky itself, and the sky was the most fundamental reality in the Mesopotamian cosmos. The earth could shake. The waters could flood, empires could rise and crumble into dust, but the sky remained eternal, perfect, beyond the reach of chaos. Its constancy was comforting. No matter what happened in the world below, the heavens endured. An's attributes were cosmically simple, yet infinitely profound. He was associated with the number 60, a number the Sumerians considered sacred and perfect, the foundation of their mathematical and astronomical systems. In artistic representations, he was depicted wearing the horned crown, the symbol of divinity, though such images of An are remarkably rare compared to statues and seals depicting other gods. This rarity itself speaks to An's nature. He was not easily represented in clay or stone because his true form was invisible, infinite, and omnipresent. How do you carve infinity into stone? How do you capture the sky in a statue? The more fundamental a principle becomes, the more difficult it is to represent in concrete form. This was understood by the ancient theologians of Sumer, who grasped something profound about the nature of ultimate reality. Among the many cosmic functions attributed to An, one stands out with particular importance. He was the father of the Anunnaki. All 50 great gods, all the cosmic council members, all those divine beings who sat in judgment and decreed the fates of the world, they were children of An, born from his union with Kai, the goddess of earth. This lineage established the Anunnaki not as random deities, but as part of a cosmic family, inheritors of An's authority, responsible for carrying out his will across all the realms of existence. When An withdrew into the highest heaven, leaving active governance to other deities, he left behind a cosmic bureaucracy. And that bureaucracy was the Annunaki, bound together by blood, by divine law, and by the immense responsibility of maintaining the universe. Sometimes, I wonder if anyone had warned them about the burden they were inheriting, the endless committee meetings, the divine paperwork, the ungrateful mortals constantly complaining about the weather and demanding better harvests at unreasonable moments. But An was not alone in this creation. In fact, no act of creation in the Sumerian cosmos was ever truly solitary. Even before An could organize the cosmos, before divine law could be established, the cosmos itself needed to be divided into manageable domains, and existence itself needed to be separated into distinct realms where life could flourish. And this brings us to the second great god of our story, Enlil, the storm god, the wind itself made conscious, the being who literally separated the heavens from the earth and made a habitable world possible. Picture the moment of creation in the ancient Sumerian imagination. At the very beginning, An and Ki lay eternally intertwined. They were not separate beings engaged in a relationship, but rather two aspects of the single unified reality. The sky and the earth were not divided but merged, holding each other in an eternal, suffocating embrace. There was no space between them, no light could penetrate. No air could circulate. The world was not empty. It was infinitely compressed, holding infinite potential but unable to express any of it. And in this compressed cosmos, how could anything live? How could civilization emerge? How could humans even exist in such conditions? The universe was a prison of unity, a suffocating uniformity that needed to be shattered if creation was to have any meaning. And then came Enlil, the force that would change everything. The texts describe his birth as an act of this very union. From An and Ki together, their offspring emerged, a being who was neither fully of heaven nor fully of earth, but rather of the space between them. Enlil's name literally means Lord of the Wind, combining En, the Sumerian word for Lord or Master, with Lil, meaning wind or breath. His very name encapsulates his nature. He is the animating force, the invisible yet utterly undeniable power that makes existence possible. In some accounts, the ancient Sumerians describe him as being born specifically from their divine union, the product of their cosmic embrace. And from the moment of his birth, Enlil's destiny was clear. He would be the one to separate his parents, to create the space that would allow creation to unfold in all its magnificent complexity. This was his role, his purpose, the very reason for his existence. The act of separation itself is described in the oldest texts with a kind of awe-struck reverence. Enlil did not ask permission from An. He did not negotiate with Kai. With the raw power of divinity itself, with the unstoppable force of wind and storm, Enlil took hold of the sky of An and lifted it away from the earth. As he did so, An rose up and up, ascending to his throne as the highest heaven, the perfect dome of stars and divine order. And Ki remained below, fertile and exposed, her body becoming the surface upon which all things could take root and grow. Enlil himself settled into the space between them, becoming the lord of the air, the wind that connects sky to earth, the breath of all living things, the very medium through which life itself could be sustained. In this moment of separation, 3 distinct cosmic realms were born. The heavens above, where An ruled in eternal perfection, the earth below, where Ki provided nourishment, and the atmosphere between them, where Enlil moved and breathed and shaped the conditions for existence. It is a moment of cosmic necessity and cosmic violence, a signature trait of divine project management when you think about it. The improvement of the universe comes not from negotiation or compromise, but from decisive, transformative action. The old, stagnant order had to be shattered so that a new, more complex reality could emerge. Enlil, in separating his own parents, committed an act that might seem rebellious or even cruel by ordinary standards. Yet, in the Sumerian understanding, his act was not rebellion, but creation itself. Without that separation, without that act of cosmic transgression, the world could not exist. The Sumerians would remember this act and honor Enlil precisely because he had been willing to defy the old order in service of something infinitely greater, not out of selfish ambition, but out of a necessity woven into the very fabric of existence. After the separation, Enlil's role evolved and deepened into something even more profound and complex. He became known as the King of the Gods, the one who held the tablets of destiny themselves, sacred stones upon which the fates of all beings were inscribed in cuneiform that no mortal hand could read or alter. These were not mere records or prophecies. They were the very blueprint of reality, the cosmic law code that governed all things from the highest heaven to the deepest reaches of the underworld. And Enlil, keeper of these tablets, became the enforcer of cosmic law, the supreme executor of divine will. His decisions were final. His commands could not be questioned, not even by An himself, for while An held ultimate authority, Enlil held the power to enforce it. An was the supreme court of appeal, Enlil was the immediate administrator of justice. This division of power, authority, and enforcement separated between 2 gods was itself elegant, preventing any single being from possessing both unlimited power and unlimited authority. The center of Enlil's worship and power was the great temple complex at Nippur, a city that stood as the spiritual capital of ancient Sumer, the place where divine will met human civilization. The temple itself was called Ikur, meaning mountain house, and it was described as the mooring rope that held together heaven and earth. Imagine this structure, a massive ziggurat, a stepped pyramid of mud brick rising tier upon tier toward the heavens, crowned with a sacred chamber where Enlil himself was believed to dwell and pass judgment. From this mountain of stone and devotion, Enlil's will flowed out across all the Sumerian lands like currents of wind. Kings came to Nippur to receive confirmation of their authority from the high priests who served as intermediaries with the god. Priests conducted elaborate rituals to appease the god when storms threatened the harvest. to ask his favor when the crops needed to flourish, to beg his mercy when chaos threatened the order of the world. The temple priests maintained such strict protocols that, according to the hymns, not even other gods were permitted to look directly upon Enlil during his most solemn moments. The idea being that his holiness was so intense, so overwhelming, that the mere sight of him could unmake the unprepared mind. To gaze upon such power without proper spiritual preparation was to risk dissolution of one's consciousness itself. And yet Enlil's power was not simply authority imposed from above like some cosmic dictator. It was authority rooted in function, in cosmic necessity, in the actual operation of the universe. Enlil was the god of agriculture, the force that provided the conditions for crops to grow in the difficult Mesopotamian environment. He was credited with the invention of the mattock, the tool that allowed humans to break the earth and plant seeds, the very foundation of civilization. Without Enlil's winds to scatter seeds and nourish plants, without his atmosphere to allow breath and motion, civilization itself would be impossible. The Sumerians, living in the harsh environment of Mesopotamia, where the summer heat could bake the earth until it cracked and the winds could carry both life-giving moisture and devastating dust storms, understood Enlil as the primal force that made survival possible. He was not a distant abstraction, but a force they experienced every day, in the breath they drew, in the winds that moved across their fields, in the storms that brought water to the parched earth. He was intimacy and danger combined, comfort and terror in one divine being. But Enlil was also a god of justice, and this is where his nature becomes truly complex and layered. He held the power to reward and to punish, and the Sumerians understood that his punishments came not from mere whim or anger, but from the necessity of maintaining cosmic order. In the great flood narratives that would later be recorded in Mesopotamian texts, stories that would eventually influence biblical tradition itself, Enlil becomes the god who decides that humanity has grown too loud, too numerous, too chaotic. According to the myths, the noise of humans disturbed the gods, preventing them from sleeping in their heavenly palaces. In one version of events, the younger gods complain constantly to the elder gods about the chaos humanity is creating. Various solutions are proposed in different versions of the story. Some gods suggest simply wiping out humanity entirely through plague or famine or other catastrophes. And Enlil, faced with this cosmic imbalance, chooses to send a great flood to reduce the population. This is not cruelty in the abstract sense, it is cosmic management, a kind of divine decision-making that prioritizes the maintenance of universal order over the comfort of individual beings. The gods must sleep. The universe must remain in balance. And if humanity is multiplied beyond what the cosmos can bear, then the population must be reduced. It's the sort of problem-solving that makes you grateful you're not on Enlil's committee, dealing with his occasional frustrations about noise levels and population management. Yet even in these narratives of punishment, we see hints of Enlil's eventual willingness to compromise and to recognize the possibility of redemption. A righteous man named Ziusudra, later known as Noah in biblical tradition, receives warning from the god Enki and builds a great boat to preserve life during the flood. When the waters recede and the world begins again, Enlil, seeing that humanity has preserved its sacred knowledge and virtue, seeing that the survivors are genuinely righteous and worthy, grants Ziusudra immortality. The message is clear: Enlil's punishments are not meant to be permanent or final. They are corrections, temporary measures to restore balance. And when balance is restored, when the humans have learned their lesson and demonstrated their worthiness, compassion can return and blessings can flow once more. This complexity, this blend of absolute authority with eventual mercy, of destructive power with creative potential, runs through all the myths of Enlil. He is simultaneously the god who cannot be questioned and the god capable of changing his mind. He is the enforcer of cosmic law and yet also a god capable of love, of devotion, of the kind of emotional vulnerability that makes the divine seem almost human in its depth and contradiction. And this brings us to perhaps the most intimate and revealing myth associated with Enlil, his legendary and deeply complicated relationship with the goddess Ninlil, a story that reveals the full complexity of divine nature. Now, imagine yourself in the sacred city of Nippur at the moment before Enlil meets his fate through love. Ninlil, also known in some texts as Sud before her transformation into a greater goddess, is a young deity of radiant beauty and divine promise. She walks along the banks of the sacred river Idnunbiatum, whose waters were believed to hold spiritual power and clarity. Her mother, Nunbarshegunu, has warned her repeatedly to stay away from this particular river. The reason is clear: Enlil frequents these banks, and a god of his power, his authority, his raw divine presence represents a formidable danger to a young goddess who has not yet fully grown into her power. But Ninlil, young and curious and perhaps bearing that streak of independence that often characterizes the divine, cannot resist the draw of the river. She walks there anyway, knowing the risk, perhaps even drawn by it. And then she encounters Enlil, the Lord of the Wind, the King of the Gods, the being who separated heaven and earth and holds the tablets of destiny. He sees her, and his desire is immediate and overwhelming. He wants her. Not in some abstract way, but with the primal need of a god who has never been denied anything, who has never needed to ask permission or accept refusal. He approaches her directly, his power hanging over her like an approaching storm, his presence filling the space like wind filling a void. In the earliest versions of this tale, Ninlil refuses him. She is not yet ready. She has not yet achieved the maturity needed for union with the King of the Gods. She asks him to wait, to give her time, to respect her wishes. But Enlil is not accustomed to refusal. His nature is to act, to move, to reshape things according to his will. Overwhelmed by his desire and frustrated by resistance, he turns to his trusted minister Nuska and asks for help crossing the river, a symbolic act that might suggest he's trying to create an escape or a more private meeting place away from observers. However, we should note that some versions of this myth contain darker undertones and more troubling implications. There are textual variants where Enlil's pursuit becomes more forceful, where his divine will begins to override Ninlil's autonomy entirely. It is one of those uncomfortable truths about ancient mythology. The gods, even the great gods, are not always paragons of virtue or moral clarity. They are repositories of immense power, and power, when untempered by wisdom or restraint or genuine respect for others' autonomy, can become destructive and oppressive. Even the ancient Sumerians seemed aware that absolute authority without accountability or ethical constraint tends to lead to problems. In some accounts, it is Nuska's assistance that allows Enlil to overcome Ninlil's resistance through guile and deception. In others, Enlil takes on a deceptive disguise, appearing as a gatekeeper or a ferryman, approaching Ninlil under false pretenses and winning her over through manipulation rather than genuine consent. The myths vary in their details, a reminder that these stories have been told and retold across centuries, each generation adding its own interpretations and moral judgments. But the essential truth remains constant. Ninlil becomes pregnant with Nanna, the moon god, and their union, born as it is from this ambiguous and complicated beginning, sets in motion a chain of events that will reshape the divine pantheon itself and test the very foundations of cosmic justice. When the other gods discover what has occurred between Enlil and Ninlil, they are outraged. Enlil's action, regardless of its final consequences or the future importance of Nanna, is seen as a violation of the natural order, a transgression that cannot go unpunished, a demonstration that even the king of the gods must answer to the cosmic community. The text speaks of Enlil becoming ritually impure, a phrase that suggests something more profound than mere ceremonial contamination. His actions have disturbed the cosmic order itself. The assembly of gods, the Anunnaki, the great council that normally defers to his authority with unquestioning obedience, rises up and arrests him. And in one of the most striking reversals in all of Sumerian mythology, they exile Enlil from the city of Nippur itself. The king of the gods, the enforcer of cosmic law, the being who holds the tablets of destiny, is cast out by his peers. He must leave the city. He must descend toward the underworld. He must, for a time, cease to be the immediate administrator of divine law. Even the highest must sometimes bow to the judgment of the council. But here is where the story takes its most profound and unexpected turn, revealing truths about love and loyalty that transcend power itself. Enlil, despite her initial resistance, despite the complicated and troubling nature of the encounter, despite the trauma and violation involved, chooses to follow him into exile. The text states simply, Enlil followed. These three words contain worlds of meaning and psychological complexity. Perhaps she has come to love him, for love can bloom even in complicated and problematic circumstances. Perhaps she feels bound to him now through their conception of Nanna and the connection that motherhood creates. Perhaps she recognizes something in Enlil's nature beneath the force, beneath the power, beneath the transgression and the violation, a being worthy of loyalty and redemption. Perhaps she understands, as the Sumerians seem to understand, that even terrible beginnings can lead to transformation and growth. Whatever her motivations, and the text does not fully explain them, she chooses to leave paradise and follow the exiled god into the darkening lands toward the underworld itself. And as they travel together through the liminal spaces between worlds, Enlil disguises himself repeatedly, as if trying to navigate the consequences of his actions through perpetual transformation. At one gate, he appears as a gatekeeper, a figure of transition and boundary. At another, he takes the form of a man of the river, embodying the waters of life. At a third, he becomes a ferryman, carrying souls across the boundary between worlds. Each disguise allows a new conception, and through these disguised unions, Enlil bears more divine children, Nergal, the god of the underworld and plague, embodying death and transformation, Ninazu, guardian of the hidden treasures beneath the earth, keeper of secrets and subterranean wealth, and Enbilulu, god of the rivers and irrigation, bringing life-giving water to the fields. In this journey, in this exile and transformation, the very fabric of the divine hierarchy is rewoven and transformed. The underworld, once mysterious and distant, becomes populated with children of Enlil, divine beings who will govern the realms of death and the hidden places beneath the earth. The cosmic order, disrupted by one god's transgression and violation, is restored not through punishment alone, but through the birth of new deities who will govern realms previously ungoverned. Through this long pilgrimage into darkness, the cosmos gains new structure, new governance, new means of maintaining order even in the shadowy underworld. What seemed like mere punishment becomes revealed as a process of cosmic reorganization and transformation. By the journey's end, Enlil's reputation is restored. The myth concludes with the affirmation of his power and the elevation of Enlil to her own place of honor and authority. She becomes, in the words of the ancient texts, the trusted ruler of the Anunnaki, standing by Enlil's side as an equal in divine authority. What began as a transgression ends as a transformation. What might have been merely a story of divine overreach becomes instead a tale of redemption through love, commitment, and the willingness to journey into darkness and emerge transformed on the other side. Enlil's loyalty was so profound, so unwavering despite everything, that it essentially rewrote cosmic law itself, turning what should have been permanent exile into a pilgrimage of divine reconstitution and renewal. This myth reveals something profound about how the ancient Sumerians understood divine authority and the possibility of redemption. Enlil's power is not diminished by his exile. His love for Enlil is not weakness, rather his willingness to be humbled, his ability to journey into the underworld itself, his acceptance of consequences and his movement beyond them. These become the very foundation upon which his greatest authority rests. He is not a god despite his complexity, his capacity for error, his need for transformation. He is a god precisely because of these things. Would you like to know something interesting? What aspects of divinity do you think matter most? Perfect power without growth, or flawed beings capable of transformation? For me, it has to be the latter. The Sumerians seem to understand that true divine authority comes not from perfection, but from the willingness to change and evolve. Now, as we sit with these ancient stories, as we imagine the sacred rivers of Nippur and the winds that carried Enlil's breath across all of creation, we might ask ourselves, what did it mean to the Sumerians to worship such gods? These were not distant abstractions, not perfect beings removed from the struggles of existence. These were gods who loved and erred, who transcended and transformed, who held absolute power and yet faced consequences like any being in the universe. And so, as we journey deeper into the divine assembly, as we move from the heights of heaven and the winds of separation down toward the earth itself and the waters that flow beneath it, we encounter another member of this cosmic family, another child of An, who would reshape creation in ways both profound and unexpected. This is Enki, whose very name speaks to his domain and his nature, Lord of the Earth. Though paradoxically, his true kingdom lay not on the surface of the world, but in the mysterious depths beneath it, in the waters that give all life its beginning and sustenance. Bixki, Enki or Ea, as the Akkadians would later call him, stands as one of the three supreme gods of the Mesopotamian pantheon, forming with An and Enlil a cosmic triad of authority, each governing a distinct realm of existence. Where An held the heavens and Enlil commanded the air and earth's surface, Enki received dominion over the Abzu, that primordial freshwater ocean that the ancient Sumerians believed lay beneath the earth itself, feeding the springs and rivers, nourishing the soil, making fertility and civilization possible. This was not a lesser inheritance, though Enki himself sometimes seemed to think so. The Abzu represented something fundamental, the source of all life, the hidden reservoir from which creativity and wisdom flowed as surely as water flows from a spring. Picture this realm for a moment, deep beneath the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, beneath the ziggurat temples and the bustling markets, beneath even the graves of the ancestors, there existed a vast ocean of sweet water, infinite and mysterious, holding within its depths all the secrets of creation itself. The Sumerians understood that life came from water, that without the rivers and springs, their civilization could not exist in that harsh landscape where the sun could crack the earth and turn fertile soil to dust in a matter of weeks. And Enki, dwelling in those cosmic depths, became the personification of water's life-giving properties, the divine consciousness that moved through every stream and pool, every irrigation canal that brought prosperity to the fields. But Enki was far more than simply a water god, and this is where his character becomes truly fascinating, truly complex in ways that reveal the sophistication of Sumerian theological thinking. Yes, he was Lord of the Waters, but he was simultaneously the god of wisdom, of knowledge in its most profound sense. The Sumerian word gestu referred not to mere facts but to deep understanding, to the kind of knowledge that transforms and creates. He was the god of crafts and arts, the patron of every skill that elevated humans above mere survival, pottery and weaving, metallurgy and architecture, music and poetry. He was the master of magic and incantation, the ultimate source of all ritual knowledge used by the exorcist priests to drive away evil spirits and cure illnesses. He was associated with fertility and virility in the most explicit sense. Ancient Sumerian texts that have only recently been translated without Victorian censorship reveal that Enki's creative power was directly linked to sexual potency, that the life-giving properties of his semen were understood as metaphorically identical to the animating nature of fresh water flowing from the depths. In artistic representations, though these are rarer than one might expect for such an important deity, Enki appears as a remarkable hybrid creature, half goat and half fish, an image that would eventually influence the modern astrological symbol for Capricorn. This form itself speaks volumes about his nature. The fish represents the watery depths, the hidden realm of the Abzu where he made his home. The goat represents virility, fertility, the life force that creates and sustains. Together, these elements form a being who bridges realms, who connects the hidden depths with the visible world, who brings forth life from mysterious sources that mortals can glimpse but never fully understand. Now, before we dive deeper into Enki's myths and meanings, let me ask you something personal. When you think about wisdom, what comes to mind? Is it the stern authority of a judge, the distant perfection of abstract knowledge? Or is it something more practical, more engaged with the messy realities of existence, the kind of wisdom that gets its hands dirty, that understands both creation and trickery, that knows when to follow rules and when to break them for a greater good? For the Sumerians, Enki embodied this second type of wisdom, and it made him perhaps the most approachable, the most genuinely helpful of all the great gods. Enki's origins within the divine family carried a complexity that would shape his entire mythology and his relationship with the other gods, particularly with Enlil. According to the ancient texts, Enki was indeed a son of An, the Sky Father, making him a member of the highest divine family, one of the Anunnaki elite. But here is where lineage becomes political, where cosmic inheritance reveals itself as remarkably similar to the succession struggles of mortal kingdoms. Enki's mother was not Antu, An's official consort, the goddess whose children would be considered legitimate heirs to the highest authority. This detail, seemingly small, seemingly merely a footnote in genealogy, would have profound consequences. Despite being possibly the firstborn son of An, despite what Enki himself believed was his rightful claim to be heir apparent of the supreme god, his birth from a secondary wife or consort meant that he would not inherit the paramount authority over earth that might otherwise have been his. That authority went instead to Enlil, whose mother held the proper position, whose legitimacy was unquestioned by the cosmic law that An himself had established. And so, when the great gods gathered to divide the cosmos among themselves, a scene described in ancient Mesopotamian texts with the formality of a divine treaty signing, the lots were cast, hands were joined, and the realms were apportioned, and received the heavens, his eternal domain. Enlil was given dominion over the earth itself, the surface world where humans would dwell and civilizations would rise. And Enki received the seas and the Abzu, the waters and the depths. On the surface, this might seem a fair distribution. Each god received a cosmic realm appropriate to their nature and power. but Enki felt the sting of what he perceived as displacement, the bitterness of one who believes he has been denied his birthright through a technicality of succession law. Some texts suggest that this resentment never entirely faded, that beneath Enki's generally benevolent and helpful nature, there simmered a quiet rivalry with Enlil, a sense that cosmic justice had not been fully served in the division of authority. Yet Enki's response to this situation reveals much about his character. Rather than open rebellion, rather than the kind of violent confrontation that characterizes so many mythological power struggles, Enki chose a different path. He would focus on his own domain, develop his own areas of influence, and ensure that his offspring, particularly his son Marduk, would one day rise to positions of supreme power that might redress the balance he felt had been disturbed. This complex relationship between Enki and Enlil runs like an undercurrent through many Mesopotamian myths, sometimes surfacing in moments of dramatic tension. The two gods represent different approaches to authority and order. Enlil is stern, commanding, the enforcer of law who will destroy what threatens cosmic balance, even if it means wiping out humanity itself. Enki is clever, adaptable, the wise counselor who finds ways to preserve life even when strict justice might demand its extinction. When Enlil decided to send the Great Flood to reduce humanity's numbers, it was Enki who defied that decision, not openly, not through direct confrontation, but through clever subterfuge. He warned Ziusudra, the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, instructing him to build a great boat and preserve not only his own family, but the knowledge and diversity of life itself. This act of compassionate defiance, of choosing human welfare over divine unanimity, defines Enki's relationship with humanity throughout Mesopotamian mythology. Because here is perhaps the most crucial aspect of Enki's nature, he was the creator and protector of humanity, the divine being who looked upon humans not merely as servants or noisemakers, but as worthy of preservation, development, and advancement. The myths tell us that when the Igigi, the lesser gods who performed the hard labor of maintaining the cosmos, particularly the brutal work of mining and excavation, finally rebelled against their endless toil, it was Enki who proposed the solution that would change everything. Working alongside the goddess Ninmah, also called Ninhursag, Enki devised and executed the creation of a substitute worker, humankind itself. Using clay mixed with the blood of a slain god, employing what we might now call genetic engineering or divine biotechnology, Enki shaped the first humans specifically to relieve the Igigi of their burden. This creation narrative, preserved in texts like the Atrahasis epic, presents humanity not as the crown of creation formed from pure divine will, but as a practical solution to a labor problem, beings designed with purpose, crafted with care, but fundamentally meant to serve. Yet Enki's relationship with his creation transcended mere utility. Again and again in the myths, we see him protecting humans, teaching them, sharing with them the knowledge and skills they would need, not just to survive, but to flourish and create civilization. He was regarded as the bearer of culture, the divine patron who taught humans the arts of irrigation and agriculture, of writing and mathematics, of medicine and magic. Every advance that lifted humanity from subsistence to civilization was attributed to Enki's generosity, his willingness to share divine knowledge with mortal minds. His patronage extended particularly to those humans who worked with knowledge and skill, the exorcist priests who used incantations to drive away demons and disease, the diviners who read omens in the stars and in the organs of sacrificed animals, the craftsmen who turned raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. These professions all fell under Enki's protection because they represented humanity's ability to manipulate reality through knowledge and technique, the very qualities that Enki himself embodied. When an exorcist priest in ancient Mesopotamia chanted an incantation to cure illness or ward off evil, he was channeling Enki's power, accessing the deep wisdom that flowed from the Abzu itself. Enki's city of Eridu, located in southern Mesopotamia near the mouth of the Euphrates River, or at least near where the Euphrates flowed in ancient times, for the coastline has shifted dramatically over 5 millennia, was regarded as one of the oldest cities in the world, perhaps even the first city established after the flood. The temple of Enki in Eridu was called the Abzu, the House of the Abzu, and it was believed to sit directly above an opening to the cosmic ocean beneath the earth. Pilgrims who came to this temple understood that they stood at one of the thinnest places in reality, where the visible world nearly touched the hidden depths, where the wisdom of the god could most easily flow upward into human consciousness. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have revealed layers upon layers of temple construction, each generation building atop the ruins of the previous shrine, maintaining the sanctity of that spot through countless centuries. In the cosmic geography of Mesopotamia, Enki was associated with the southern band of constellations, those stars that wheel through the southern sky in eternal procession. While An was identified with the equatorial stars and Enlil with the northern sky, Enki's celestial realm was the south, a division that gave each of the 3 supreme gods not only an earthly domain but a heavenly one as well, ensuring that their influence extended through all levels of reality. The planet Mercury was associated with Enki in early Sumerian astronomy, though later it would be connected with Nabu, Enki's grandson, and so was the bright star Canopus, second brightest in the night sky, a beacon shining in the southern heavens. The sacred number of Enki was 40, considered a number of completion and perfection in Mesopotamian mathematics. Sometimes in later texts, scribes would simply write the numeral 40 to represent Enki's name, a shorthand that simultaneously honored the god and demonstrated the sophisticated symbolic systems that Mesopotamian religion had developed over millennia of theological reflection. But perhaps the most revealing myths about Enki are those that show him in action, using his intelligence and adaptability to navigate complex situations, sometimes through legitimate means and sometimes through clever trickery. One such narrative is Enki and the World Order, a composition that describes how the god travelled throughout the cosmos, assigning functions to various deities, establishing the divine bureaucracy that would govern reality. In this myth, Enki acts almost as a cosmic systems designer, allocating responsibilities, fixing national boundaries, ensuring that every aspect of existence has a divine overseer responsible for its maintenance. The Anunnaki themselves gather to do homage to Enki, singing hymns in his honor, acknowledging his role in organizing the cosmos into a functional system. Twice in this composition, the text explicitly states that the Anunnaki decree the fates of mankind, not individually, but as a council with Enki as the organizing intelligence. This portrayal of Enki as cosmic organizer, as the intelligence that imposes order on chaos and assigns roles to ensure the smooth functioning of reality, demonstrates how the Sumerians understood wisdom not as passive contemplation but as active engagement, as problem-solving and systems, thinking applied to the fundamental structures of existence itself. Enki doesn't merely know things, he uses knowledge to create functional solutions, to build systems that work, to ensure that the cosmos operates according to rational principles rather than descending into chaos. Yet this same Enki could be devious, even mischievous, especially in his relationships with other gods. There's a playfulness to him, a willingness to bend rules and employ trickery when he believes the ends justify the means. This quality comes through most clearly in the myths involving his interactions with the goddess Inanna, particularly the story of how she acquired the me, those fundamental divine powers and civilizing arts that governed all aspects of existence. But before we can understand that story fully, we must turn our attention to Inanna herself, perhaps the most complex, most paradoxical, most absolutely captivating deity in the entire Sumerian pantheon, the Queen of Heaven. Inanna, Ishtar in the Akkadian tongue that would dominate Mesopotamia in later centuries, was the goddess of love and war, of sexuality and political power, of the planet Venus that shines as both morning and evening star, of sacred marriage and ruthless ambition. Her very nature was paradox incarnate. She was the maiden and the warrior, the life-giver and the destroyer, the embodiment of erotic passion and the bringer of devastating conflict. No other deity in Mesopotamian religion commanded such devotion, inspired such passionate hymns, generated such elaborate rituals. She was, in the truest sense, the Queen of Heaven, and her influence extended across all of Mesopotamia and beyond, into Canaan and Phoenicia, wherever the cultural power of Mesopotamian civilization spread. Inanna was the patron goddess of Uruk, one of the greatest cities of ancient Sumer, perhaps the greatest city in the world during the 4th millennium BCE, when urban civilization was still finding its form and possibility. Her temple in Uruk, called the Inanna, the House of Heaven, was a massive complex that dominated the city's sacred precinct, a place where elaborate rituals of sacred marriage were performed, where priestesses served the goddess through acts both spiritual and physical, where the very boundaries between divine and human, between sacred and profane, became permeable and strange. The myths describe Inanna as radiantly beautiful, adorned with lapis lazuli and carnelian, wearing the crown of the steppe, carrying the rod and ring that symbolize divine authority. She was associated with the lion, that fearsome predator that embodies both royal power and untamed ferocity. In artistic representations, she often appears standing on the backs of lions or flanked by them, demonstrating her mastery over even the most dangerous forces. She carried weapons, the bow and arrow, the sword, the mace, and she knew how to use them. She was no distant, passive feminine ideal, but a fully realized deity of agency and power, capable of tenderness and cruelty in equal measure. Inanna's mythology is vast, filling more cuneiform tablets than perhaps any other Mesopotamian deity except possibly Enlil. She appears in stories of love and seduction, in tales of political intrigue, in narratives of cosmic adventure. She has relationships with gods and mortals. She demands worship and tribute. She grants blessings and inflicts curses with equal ease. But among all her myths, 3 stand out as particularly revealing of her nature and her role in the cosmic order: her acquisition of the me from Enki, her sacred marriage to Dumuzi, and her descent into the underworld. Let us explore these in the depth they deserve. The me pronounced May, a Sumerian word that defies simple translation into modern languages, were the fundamental divine powers and cultural institutions that made civilization possible. These were not abstract principles, but actual things, objects or forces that could be possessed, transferred, stolen. The me included concepts like kingship and priesthood, but also arts and crafts, music and writing, sexual intercourse and prostitution, warfare and peace, truth-telling and lying. There were over 100 me in total, encompassing essentially every aspect of human civilization, from the highest religious offices to the most mundane daily activities. And originally, all of these me were in the possession of Enki, kept safe in his temple at Eridu, guarded by the god of wisdom as precious treasures. Inanna, young and ambitious queen of Uruk but hungry for greater power and authority, decided that she must have these me for herself. The story of how she obtained them reveals both her cunning and Enki's weakness for beauty and charm, and, significantly, for beer. The myth describes Inanna traveling to Eridu, to Enki's temple, presenting herself before the god of wisdom with all her beauty and charisma fully deployed. Enki, pleased by her visit, offers her hospitality as any proper host should, and they begin to drink beer together, that ancient beverage that the Sumerians invented and loved, that appears in their myths and their hymns as a gift of civilization itself. As the beer flows and the atmosphere becomes more relaxed and jovial, Enki, his wisdom perhaps slightly impaired by alcohol, his defenses lowered by Inanna's charm and beauty, begins to offer her the me, one after another. He grants her the crown, the throne, the art of love-making, the art of kissing, the art of seduction. He gives her the holy Gudugshu shrine, the musical instruments, the art of making judgments. On and on he goes, bestowing me after me, divine power after divine power, until over 100 fundamental forces and institutions have been handed over to the young goddess. Inanna, significantly less affected by the beer than Enki despite drinking alongside him, accepts each gift solemnly, loading them into the boat of heaven for the journey back to Uruk. When Enki finally sobers up, as one inevitably must after such celebrations, he realizes with horror what he has done. The me are gone. The fundamental powers that structured civilization have been given away in a moment of drunken generosity. He sends his minister Isimud to chase after Inanna, to intercept the boat of heaven and reclaim the me before they reach Uruk. 7 times Isimud catches up with Inanna. 7 times he demands the return of the me, and 7 times Inanna's faithful servant Ninshubor, her ever-loyal vizier and companion, fights him off, allowing the goddess to continue her journey. By the time Inanna reaches Uruk with her precious cargo, it is too late for Enki to reclaim them. The me have entered the city, have been installed in Inanna's temple, have become the possession of Uruk itself. Enki, wise as he is, recognizes that what is done is done. He accepts the new distribution of cosmic power, and Inanna becomes not merely the queen of a city, but the possessor of the fundamental forces that make human civilization possible. This myth tells us several profound things. First, it demonstrates that even the wisest god can be outwitted, that intelligence alone does not guarantee immunity to manipulation, that desire and social bonds can override careful judgment. Second, it shows Inanna as fundamentally active, as a goddess who does not wait for power to be granted, but seizes it through whatever means necessary. In this case, through charm, beauty, alcohol, and strategic timing. Third, it suggests that the distribution of cosmic power is not fixed and eternal, but can be redistributed, that the younger generation of gods can acquire authorities that once belonged exclusively to their elders. And finally, it establishes Uruk, Inanna's city, as the possessor of civilization's fundamental institutions, explaining why Uruk became such a dominant cultural force in early Mesopotamian history. But love and trickery were only aspects of Inanna's nature. She was also the goddess of the sacred marriage, the ritual union between the goddess and the king that ensured fertility for the land and legitimacy for the ruler. Her most famous consort was Dumuzi, called Tammuz in later Semitic languages, a shepherd god who would become one of the most tragic figures in Mesopotamian mythology. The courtship between Inanna and Dumuzi is described in some of the most beautiful love poetry surviving from the ancient world, verses that celebrate erotic desire with surprising explicitness and genuine tenderness. In these poems, Inanna and Dumuzi exchange passionate declarations, anticipating their union with language that is simultaneously sacred and sensual. Inanna speaks of preparing her body for her lover, of adorning herself, of the pleasure she anticipates. Dumuzi praises her beauty, compares her to the sweetest fruits and the most precious metals. Their union is portrayed not as a mere divine coupling, but as an act of cosmic significance, a sacred marriage that will ensure the fertility of fields and flocks, the prosperity of cities, the continuation of life itself. In the ritual reenactments performed in Mesopotamian temples, the king would play the role of Dumuzi, and the high priestess would embody Inanna, and their sacred union would renew the covenant between gods and humans, between heaven and earth. Yet this love story, like so many ancient tales, carries within it the seeds of tragedy. The union of Inanna and Dumuzi would lead, through a chain of events both necessary and devastating, to Dumuzi's death and descent into the underworld, to Inanna's greatest journey and most profound transformation. But before we reach that climactic narrative, we must pause here, at this moment of love and anticipation, and recognize what the Sumerians understood, that even the gods experience desire and tenderness, that even cosmic forces can know the vulnerability of love, that the greatest powers in the universe are not immune to the complications and consequences of intimate relationships. Would you consider this? That perhaps the reason these myths have endured for 5,000 years is not merely because they explain how the world works, but because they acknowledge how we work, how all conscious beings work, divine or mortal. The gods of Sumer were not perfect beings demanding worship from a distance. They were fully realized characters experiencing the full spectrum of existence, ambition and regret, love and loss, triumph and tragedy. They were, in the deepest sense, representations of the forces that shape all our lives, given voice and narrative form. And now, as we stand on the threshold of Inanna's greatest myth, her journey to the underworld and the price that journey demanded, we begin to understand that these ancient stories are not merely historical curiosities or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. They are profound meditations on transformation, on the necessity of descent and loss, on the price of power and knowledge, on the eternal cycles of life and death and rebirth that govern all existence. The Queen of Heaven is about to descend into darkness, and nothing, not the cosmos, not the divine hierarchy, not even Inanna herself, will ever be quite the same again. The Great Mother. And so, as we trace the lineages of divine power through the cosmic family, as we follow the threads of creation from the heights of heaven through the winds of separation and down into the depths of wisdom's waters, we encounter a figure who stands as perhaps the most ancient archetype in all of human religious consciousness. The Mother Goddess herself, she who was known by countless names across countless generations, but who appears in Sumerian texts most prominently as Ninhursag, the Lady of the Sacred Mountain. 2. Ninhursag, also called Ninmah, meaning Magnificent Queen, and Nintu, Lady of Birth, and Aruru, she who creates, and by the Akkadians as Bele Ili, Queen of the Gods, was one of the 7 great deities of Sumer, standing alongside An and Endindil and Enki as one of the 4 primary creator gods who shaped the cosmos and everything within it. Her domain was the earth itself, but not the cultivated fields and irrigation canals that Enlil governed through wind and rain. Rather, Ninhursag ruled over the wild places, the stony ground, the rocky hillsides and mountain slopes where civilization had not yet imposed its order, where nature remained raw and untamed and mysteriously fertile despite the harshness of the terrain. The very name Ninhursag translates as Lady of the Sacred Mountain, or Lady of the Mountain, a title she received in the epic poem known as Lugal, where her son Ninurta, the fierce god of war and hunting, defeats the demon Asag and his army of living stones, building a great mountain from their defeated corpses and dedicating his victory to his mother, renaming her in honor of that moment. This connection to mountains and highlands runs deep through all her mythology. The Sumerians, living in the flat alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, looked toward the distant mountain ranges, the Zagros Mountains to the east, where precious stones and metals could be found, where wild animals roamed, where the sources of their life-giving rivers originated, and they saw in those heights the domain of the great mother goddess who brought forth life even from stone and rock. In the most ancient iconography, Ninhursag is represented by a symbol resembling the Greek letter omega, often accompanied by a knife or blade. Scholars believe this omega shape represents the uterus, the sacred womb from which all life emerges, while the knife symbolizes the blade used to cut the umbilical cord, severing the physical connection between mother and child while establishing the independent life that continues beyond birth. This symbol, simple yet profound, encapsulates Ninhursag's essential nature. She is the birther, the nurturer, the one who brings life into being and then releases it to fulfill its own destiny. She creates, but she does not possess. She gives life, but she does not control what that life becomes. Teta. Now, before we journey deeper into her myths, let me ask you something. What makes a mother divine rather than merely biological? Is it the act of giving birth, or is it the nurturing that comes after? Is it the physical creation of a body, or the transmission of wisdom and care that allows that body to become more than mere flesh? The ancient Sumerians understood that motherhood, true motherhood, encompasses all of these dimensions. Ninhursag was not simply the goddess who birthed the gods and shaped humanity from clay. She was the ongoing presence that sustained life, that provided nourishment, that protected the vulnerable, that ensured the continuation of existence itself through countless generations. Ninhursag's origins in the divine family connect her to the very foundations of creation. In her earliest form, she was known as Damkina or Dangalnuna, worshipped in the city of Malgam as a nurturing mother goddess associated with fertility. Some traditions identify her as Ki or Kishar, literally Mother Earth, making her the consort of An, the sky god, and therefore the mother of all the Anunnaki themselves. This would make her the primordial earth from which all divine beings emerged, the ground of being itself personified as a nurturing feminine presence. Other texts describe her as having Sul-Pa-E as her original consort, a minor god associated with the underworld, with whom she bore 3 children, Asgi, Lisin, and Lil. But the relationship that defines Ninhursag most profoundly in surviving mythology is her partnership with Enki, the god of wisdom and water, whom we met in our journey through the divine assembly. These 2 deities, wisdom and earth, water and stone, male creativity and female fertility, come together again and again in Mesopotamian myths as complementary forces, sometimes working in harmony, sometimes in conflict, but always fundamentally necessary to each other for creation to unfold properly. Where Enki represents the flowing, adaptable, clever aspect of creation knowledge that moves and changes, wisdom that finds solutions through flexibility, Ninhursag embodies the solid, enduring, foundational aspect, the substance from which forms are made, the ground that remains constant even as everything built upon it transforms and evolves. The most famous myth involving Ninhursag and Enki takes place in Dilmun, a paradisiacal realm described in ancient texts as a place of perfection and purity, a land that knew no sickness or death, no old age or suffering. Some scholars believe Dilmun was a real location, perhaps modern Bahrain or the eastern coast of Arabia, that became mythologized as a divine paradise, a garden before the Garden of Eden, a place where gods could dwell in peace and harmony. In this blessed realm, Ninhursag and Enki lived together, and the texts describe their union with the kind of explicit detail that Victorian translators found deeply uncomfortable, but which reveals the Sumerians' understanding that divine creativity was fundamentally linked to sexual generation, The myth tells us that Dilmun, despite its perfection, lacked one crucial element: fresh water. And so Enki, in his role as Lord of the Sweet Waters, caused springs to rise from the earth, filling Dilmun with life, giving moisture, allowing plants to grow in abundance. Ninhursag, in response to this gift, caused 8 plants to sprout, sacred plants, each one unique and precious, each one carrying special properties. The text describes these plants with loving detail, though we can no longer identify with certainty what species they might have been. What matters is that they were Ninhursag's creations, brought forth from her essence, manifestations of her creative power made visible in the world. But here is where the story takes a turn that reveals the complexity of divine relationships and the consequences of even gods failing to respect boundaries. Enki, curious and hungry and perhaps unable to resist the urge to possess and consume what has been created, begins to eat these sacred plants one by one. His minister Isimud, that same loyal servant who would later chase after Inanna when she stole the me, brings each plant to Enki, and the god consumes them, taking into himself the essences that Ninhursag had labored to create. When Ninhursag discovers what Enki has done, her rage is absolute and terrible. She pronounces a curse upon him: "Until you are dead, I will not look upon you with the eye of life." Oh, this curse is no mere expression of anger. In Mesopotamian understanding, the eye of life represented the sustaining gaze of the divine, the attention that keeps things in existence. To withdraw that gaze was to condemn something to death, to remove it from the cycle of life and renewal. And so Enki, the great god of wisdom, begins to sicken and die. 8 organs of his body fail, one for each plant he consumed. The assembly of gods gathers in panic and dismay. Enki cannot die. He is too fundamental to the functioning of the cosmos, too necessary for the maintenance of order. But Ninhursag has withdrawn from the divine council, gone away to some distant place, and will not return to heal the one who violated her creations. Finally, through the intervention of a clever fox who agrees to bring Ninhursag back in exchange for a reward, the mother goddess returns to the dying god. Some versions suggest she comes out of compassion for the other gods who plead with her. Others imply she comes because she herself cannot bear to let creation be diminished by Enki's death. Whatever her motivation, she performs an act of profound mercy and creativity. She places Enki in her vulva, the source of all creation, and gives birth to 8 healing deities, one for each of Enki's failing organs. These 8 healer gods, Nintulla for the chest, Ninsig for the ribs, Ninsutu for the tooth, Ninkasi for the mouth, Natsi for the throat, Dazimua for the side, and Shagag for the limbs, and Ninhursag herself for the birth-giving organ, emerge from the goddess's body as living remedies, divine physicians who restore Enki to health and wholeness. Through this act, Ninhursag demonstrates that her power extends beyond mere creation into healing, restoration, and transformation. She can bring life from nothing, but she can also resurrect what has begun to die, repair what has been broken, heal what has been wounded. This myth carries within it profound truths about the relationship between creation and destruction, between respect for boundaries and the consequences of violation, between anger and forgiveness, between justice and mercy. Enki violated Ninhursag's creations, consumed what was not meant to be consumed, took without permission. His punishment was appropriate. He experienced the diminishment and death that comes from such violation. But ultimately, the cosmos requires both wisdom and earth, both water and stone, both male and female principles working together. And so Ninhursag, despite her justified anger, chooses restoration over permanent destruction, healing over lasting vengeance. She demonstrates that motherhood at its deepest level means sustaining life, even when that life has caused harm, finding ways to restore balance without destroying what is necessary for existence to continue. But perhaps Ninhursag's most significant role in Mesopotamian mythology is her participation in the creation of humanity itself. The texts tell us that in the beginning, the Igigi, the lesser gods assigned to perform the hard labor of maintaining the cosmos, grew weary of their endless toil. They dug canals and cleared rivers. They mined precious metals and carried heavy burdens. They performed all the physical work necessary to keep the universe functioning. And finally, after countless years of this exhausting labor, they rebelled. They gathered together, they burned their tools, they marched on Enlil's temple in protest, demanding relief from their burden. The great gods convened in emergency council. How could they restore order? How could they ensure the necessary work was done without forcing the Igigi back into slavery? It was Enki, ever the problem solver, who proposed the solution. They would create a substitute worker, a new being specifically designed to perform the labor the gods no longer wished to do. And it was Ninhursag who would serve as the divine midwife, the one who would actually fashion these new creatures and bring them into being. Namur. According to the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest and most complete creation accounts from Mesopotamia, the gods slaughtered Waila, one of the rebel Igigi, and mixed his blood with clay. This mixture of divine essence and earthly substance became the material from which humanity would be formed. Ninhursag took this sacred clay, shaped it with her divine hands, and through a process the texts describe in detail, dividing the clay, creating male and female, breathing life into inert matter, brought forth the first humans. The Sumerian name for humanity, Lalu, might be translated as primitive worker or mixed one, reflecting both humanity's purpose and its dual nature, part divine through the god's blood and part earthly through the clay. 14 pieces of clay were prepared, 7 male and 7 female, and Ninhursag, working as the cosmic midwife, brought forth 14 humans, the first generation from which all future humans would descend. The texts describe her placing the clay in her womb, carrying these proto-humans through a gestation period, giving birth to them as a mother gives birth to children. She was not merely crafting objects, but genuinely creating living beings, transferring something of her own essence into them, making them, in a real sense, her children. This creation myth established Ninhursag's relationship with humanity as fundamentally maternal. She was not the distant creator who forms and forgets, but the mother who brings forth, nurtures, protects, and continues to care for her offspring throughout their existence. Ancient Sumerian mothers invoked Ninhursag during pregnancy and childbirth, believing that she was present in every woman's womb, forming the child, protecting it during the dangerous months of gestation, and ensuring safe delivery. Pregnant women wore amulets bearing her symbols, seeking her blessing and protection. Midwives performed their work under her patronage, understanding themselves as human agents of the Divine Mother's ongoing creative work. Ninhursag's temples were established across ancient Mesopotamia from the 30th century BCE through the first millennium BCE, a span of nearly 3,000 years during which her worship remained constant even as political powers rose and fell. Cities were built and destroyed, and the surface features of Mesopotamian religion evolved and changed. Her most important cult centers included the city of Kesh, one of the oldest cities of Sumer, where a magnificent temple called the Mountain House was dedicated to her worship. Another major center was at Tel al-Ubaid, near the ancient city of Ur, where archaeological excavations have uncovered elaborate friezes depicting lions, sacred animals associated with the mother goddess, and evidence of extensive ritual activity spanning many centuries. In these temples, rituals emphasized themes of fertility, healing, and the sacred power of water to sustain life. Priests and priestesses performed ceremonies marking the agricultural seasons, planting and harvest, the times when humanity most directly depended on the earth's fertility and the mother goddess's blessing for survival. Offerings were made seeking her favor for successful pregnancies, healthy children, abundant crops, thriving livestock. She was invoked as a goddess of both wild and domesticated animals, as the mother of all creatures that moved upon the earth, from the lions of the wilderness to the sheep in the shepherd's fold. In artistic representations, when she appears at all, for like Anne, the most fundamental deities are paradoxically the hardest to represent in concrete form. Ninhursag is shown with distinctive iconographic elements. She wears her hair in the characteristic omega shape, that symbol of the womb and the source of life. She is crowned with the horned headdress that marks divine status in Mesopotamian art. Sometimes she carries a mace or rod of office, demonstrating that her maternal nature did not preclude political authority and power. She appears offering bread to infants, embodying her role as nurturer, as the one who sustains life after bringing it into being. 2. But there is another aspect to Ninhursag that the ancient Mesopotamians understood and that we must not overlook in our desire to see her only as gentle and nurturing. She was also associated with hunger and famine, with the times when the earth withdrew its fertility and the stony ground refused to yield its sustenance. This dual nature, life-giving and withholding, nurturing and destructive, reflects the reality that the earth itself gives and takes away, that fertility is not constant but cyclical, that the same forces that bring abundance can also bring scarcity. The mother goddess, like the earth she personified, could be generous or harsh, depending on circumstances beyond simple human control. Her legacy extended far beyond Sumer itself. As Mesopotamian culture spread through trade and conquest, as ideas and practices moved along ancient routes connecting distant civilizations, the concept of the mother goddess traveled with them. In Babylon, she became Bele Tili, honored in the great temples of that magnificent city. Her attributes influenced the worship of Gaia in Greece, that primordial earth mother from whom all the Olympian gods descended. Her characteristics appear in the Egyptian goddess Hathor, associated with motherhood, fertility, and the nurturing aspects of the feminine divine. Even into Central and South Asia, echoes of her worship and iconography can be traced, influencing the development of later mother goddesses in Hindu tradition. The divine sun. And now, as we complete our journey through the Anunnaki, as we trace the final threads of this cosmic family, we turn our gaze upward from the earth and toward the blazing light that crosses the sky each day, toward one of the most beloved and trusted deities in all the Mesopotamian pantheon, Utu, whom the Akkadians and Babylonians would call Shamash, the god of the sun and the embodiment of justice itself. Utu was the son of Nanna, the moon god, and Ningal, the moon goddess, making him the grandson of Enlil and therefore a member of the highest tier of divine nobility. His sister was none other than Inanna, the Queen of Heaven whom we encountered earlier, and the bond between these siblings, between the sun god and the goddess of love and war, runs through many of the most important myths of ancient Mesopotamia. Utu was married to Sherida, also called Aya, a goddess associated with light and dawn, and together they represented the complete cycle of the sun's daily journey across the heavens. But Utu was far more than simply the personification of the sun, far more than the divine explanation for why light crosses the sky from east to west each day. He was the god who sees everything, whose light penetrates into every corner of existence, who illuminates what is hidden and reveals what has been concealed. Because the sun's rays reach everywhere, because nothing can hide from sunlight during the hours of day, Utu became the supreme judge of the cosmos, the deity who knew all secrets, witnessed all deeds, and could therefore render perfect justice based on complete knowledge. Picture the moment of sunrise in ancient Mesopotamia, not the gentle dawn of northern latitudes, but the sudden, almost violent emergence of light in the desert lands where the horizon is vast and unobstructed. One moment, darkness covers the earth. The next moment, the sun bursts over the eastern horizon like a warrior emerging for battle, and within minutes the entire landscape is transformed, illuminated, exposed. Nothing can hide from that light. Every stone casts a shadow, every creature becomes visible. The world that was mysterious and potentially dangerous in darkness becomes known and navigable in light. This daily transformation, repeated endlessly throughout time, became for the Sumerians the perfect metaphor for justice, the revealing of truth, the exposure of wrongdoing, the illumination that allows right judgment. Utu's most important temple was Ibabar, the House of the Rising Sun, located in the city of Sippar in northern Babylonia, though he also had significant cult centers in Lhasa and Ur in the south. At these temples, elaborate rituals marked the sun's daily journey. Each morning, priests would perform ceremonies to honor Utu's emergence from the cosmic mountains in the east, where he passed through the great gates of heaven to begin his journey across the sky. Each evening, similar rituals marked his descent into the western mountains, where he would travel through the underworld during the night hours, bringing light even to the realm of the dead before emerging once more in the east to begin the cycle again. In artistic representations, Utu typically appears as a mature, bearded man, the standard form for powerful male deities in Mesopotamian iconography, but with distinctive attributes that mark him as the sun god. Rays of light emerge from his shoulders, extending upward and outward like wings or a corona, sometimes ending in small stars. He holds the saw, a distinctive symbol representing his ability to cut through obstacles and penetrate barriers, to separate truth from falsehood as a saw separates one piece of wood from another. He also carries the rod and ring, the symbols of divine authority and judgment, marking his role as supreme judge. But perhaps Utu's most important quality was his accessibility, his willingness to hear the prayers of ordinary people and render judgment in their disputes. Unlike An, who remained distant in the highest heaven, or Enlil, who commanded from his throne in Nippur, or even Enki, whose wisdom operated on cosmic scales, Utu was directly involved in human affairs. When a person felt they had been wronged, when injustice had been done and no human authority could or would set things right, they could appeal to Utu. He was the god of the oppressed, the defender of the weak, the one who ensured that the powerful could not simply dominate the powerless without consequence. This aspect of Utu's nature appears throughout Mesopotamian literature. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the hero and his companion Enkidu plan to journey to the cedar forest to confront the monster Humbaba, they seek Utu's blessing and protection. Utu questions their motives. Why would they undertake such a dangerous quest? But ultimately provides aid because the expedition, despite its risks, serves the greater good of humanity. Throughout their journey, Utu watches over them, and at the crucial moment when Humbaba threatens to overcome them, Utu sends the storm winds to bind the monster, allowing the heroes to prevail. In the myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld, that profound narrative we touched upon earlier, it is Utu who plays a crucial role in her rescue. When Inanna descends to the realm of her sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, and is killed and hung upon a hook, her loyal servant Ninshubur goes to the great gods pleading for help. Enlil and Nanna both refuse, saying that Inanna brought this fate upon herself through her own choices. But Utu, despite also declining to intervene directly, provides counsel and perhaps subtle assistance that enables Enki's plan to rescue Inanna to succeed. The sun god, even when he cannot openly defy cosmic law, finds ways to bend toward mercy and life. This pattern repeats across many myths. Utu as the god who helps heroes, who provides guidance to the lost, who shines light into dark places, both literal and metaphorical. He was the god that ordinary Sumerians felt they could actually approach, whose temples were places where justice could be sought and potentially found. Legal codes and law collections were placed under his divine authority. The famous Code of Hammurabi, though carved during a much later Babylonian period, depicts King Hammurabi receiving the laws directly from Shamash Utu, establishing that legal justice flows from the sun god's cosmic justice. The number associated with Utu was 20, representing his position in the divine hierarchy and his sacred significance in Mesopotamian numerology. His celestial realm was, naturally, the sun itself, not merely the visible disk that crosses the sky, but the cosmic force of solar power, the life-giving heat and light without which the earth would freeze and die. The Mesopotamians understood, with a sophistication that often surprises modern readers, that the sun was the source of life's energy, that without its light plants could not grow, animals could not survive, and human civilization could not exist. And so, as we reach the end of this journey through the Anunnaki, as we stand in the light of Utu's all-seeing gaze, we complete the circle of divine power that governed the ancient Mesopotamian cosmos. From An's distant heaven to Enlil's transforming wind, from Enki's deep wisdom to Inanna's passionate power, from Ninhursag's fertile earth to Utu's revealing light. These gods formed a complete system, a cosmic order in which every aspect of existence had its proper place, its divine overseer, its connection to the eternal patterns that structure reality itself. These were the Anunnaki, the great gods, those who came from Anu and who shaped the world through their conflicts and collaborations, their loves and rivalries, their creative acts and destructive impulses. They were not perfect beings, but fully realized characters, experiencing the complete spectrum of existence. And in their stories, told and retold for 5,000 years, preserved on clay tablets buried in desert sands, and finally decoded by modern scholars, we find not mere primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, but profound meditations on power and justice, creation and destruction, the necessity of order, and the possibility of mercy, the eternal cycles that govern all our lives, whether we acknowledge them or not. The Lord of Silver Light. And now, as we continue our journey through the divine assembly, as the stories of the Anunnaki unfold before us like an ancient scroll slowly revealing its secrets, we turn our attention to one of the most beloved and enigmatic deities in all of Mesopotamian religion, Nanna, the moon god, whose silver light has guided travelers and marked the passage of time since the very dawn of human civilization. Chia, Nanna, called Sin or Suen in the Akkadian language that would later dominate Mesopotamian culture, was the firstborn son of Enlil and Ninlil, conceived in circumstances we have already explored, born from that complicated union by the sacred river, and carried through the underworld journey that transformed his parents from transgressors into pillars of the divine order. His very existence represented redemption, the possibility that even from troubled beginnings, from exile and consequence, new light could emerge to illuminate the darkness. And what more perfect symbol for this than the moon itself? That celestial body that waxes from nothing into fullness, wanes back into shadow, and is reborn again in an eternal cycle of death and renewal. Temper, picture the moon rising over the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, over the city of where Nanna's greatest temple stood like a mountain reaching toward the heavens. The night sky, which moments before was dominated by stars alone, suddenly gains a new presence, gentle yet commanding, bright enough to cast shadows yet soft enough not to blind, mysterious in its changing faces yet reliable in its eternal return. The Sumerians, watching this celestial drama unfold night after night, generation after generation, understood that they were witnessing something profoundly divine, something that connected the rhythms of heaven with the cycles of earthly existence. Nanna's primary symbol was the crescent moon, that curved sliver of light that appears in the western sky after sunset during the waxing phase, or in the eastern sky before dawn during the waning phase. But the ancient Mesopotamians, with their remarkable ability to perceive connections between disparate elements of their world, saw in this crescent shape something else entirely, the horns of a bull. And so the bull became Nanna's other great symbol, particularly the wild bull with its power and virility, its connection to fertility and abundance. This association was not arbitrary or merely poetic. The people who lived in the marshlands around the lower Euphrates River, where was situated, depended for their survival on herds of cattle. They needed milk and dairy products, leather and meat, animals for pulling plows and carrying burdens. And they believed, with an intensity we can barely imagine in our modern world of industrial agriculture, that Nanna directly controlled the size of their herds, the water levels in the marshes, the growth of the reeds that fed their animals. The moon god was not a distant abstraction, but an immediate presence in their daily lives. When the moon was full and bright, they saw Nanna in his strength, blessing the herds with fertility, ensuring abundant milk production, watching over the marshes with protective care. When the moon waned and darkness grew, they understood that Nanna was travelling through other realms, performing other duties, but would return in his appointed time to renew his blessings. This cycle, presence and absence, light and darkness, fullness and emptiness, became for the Mesopotamians a fundamental pattern of existence itself, a rhythm written into the very fabric of reality by the moon god's eternal journey. But Nanna was far more than merely a god of cattle and moonlight. He was called the diviner of fates, given the same power to see and judge that we encountered in Utu, the sun god. This makes perfect sense when you consider the nature of moonlight. Unlike the sun, which illuminates everything equally and completely, the moon reveals the world partially, mysteriously, allowing shadows to persist even in light. The moon shows us the world as it appears in dreams, recognizable yet strange, familiar yet transformed, visible yet not entirely knowable. And so Nanna became associated with divination, with the reading of omens, with the mysterious knowledge that comes not through direct observation, but through interpretation of signs and symbols. The ancient Mesopotamians believed that Nanna could influence dreams, that he moved through the nighttime realm of human consciousness just as surely as he moved through the night sky. When a person slept and dreamed beneath Nanna's light, their dreams might carry messages from the divine realm, prophecies of what was to come, warnings of dangers to avoid. Priests trained in the interpretation of dreams would invoke Nanna's name, seeking his guidance in understanding the symbolic language through which the gods communicated with mortals. Now, let me ask you something. When you look at the moon, whether it's full and bright or a mere sliver hanging in the twilight, do you feel something shift inside you? Some primal recognition that this light is different from all other lights, that it connects us to mysteries our rational minds can barely touch. The ancient Sumerians felt this with an intensity that shaped their entire religious consciousness. They understood that Inanna represented not just physical light, but a kind of spiritual illumination, a wisdom that came from accepting the cycles of presence and absence, fullness and emptiness, rather than demanding constant, unchanging certainty. Nanna's wife was Ningal, whose name means Great Lady, a goddess associated with the reed marshes and with fertility in its most essential forms. The myth of their courtship, preserved in beautiful Sumerian love poetry, tells us that Ningal was a young woman from the marshlands near Eridu who fell deeply in love with the moon god. She composed a love song expressing her longing for him, singing it beneath the night sky with such passion and beauty that Nanna heard her from his celestial realm and was captivated. He descended to earth, literally descended, for the gods could move between realms when they chose, to pursue a relationship with this remarkable mortal-born goddess who had won his heart with her song. But Ningal, despite her love and desire, insisted on following proper marriage customs. She would not simply yield to the god's advances, no matter how powerful he was or how deeply she felt drawn to him. The rituals must be observed. The social order must be maintained. Her parents must give their blessing. The wedding must be celebrated according to tradition. And Nanna, unlike some gods we have encountered who took what they wanted regardless of propriety, respected her wishes. He courted her properly, won the approval of her family, and married her with all the ceremony and celebration that such a union deserved. This myth reveals something profound about how the Sumerians understood divine power and human dignity. Even a god must respect the autonomy and customs of those he loves. Even the most passionate desire must be tempered by respect for tradition and social order. The myth of Nanna and Ningal became a model for proper courtship and marriage throughout Mesopotamian culture, demonstrating that true love includes patience, respect, and adherence to the customs that hold society together. From their union came children who would themselves become central figures in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Utu, the sun god whom we have already encountered, was their son, and in some traditions, Inanna was described as Utu's twin sister, making her also a child of Nanna and Ningal. Can you imagine this cosmic family? The moon god and his consort, giving birth to the sun itself, to the light that dominates the day, just as their father dominates the night. And alongside the sun, the morning star and evening star. Inanna, in her dual aspect as Venus, appearing in the western sky after sunset or the eastern sky before dawn, forever dancing between her father's realm and her brother's, belonging fully to neither day nor night, but to the liminal spaces between them. Some texts also name Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, as a daughter of Nanna and Ningal, though other traditions give her different parentage. If this lineage is accepted, it adds yet another dimension to Nanna's family, not just the sun and Venus, light and love, but also death and the underworld, the realm of endings and eternal shadow. The moon god's children would thus encompass the full spectrum of existence, day and night, love and death, light in all its forms from the blazing solar disk to the wan glow of the underworld's flickering lamps. Nanna's most important cult center was the great temple complex at Ur, one of the most ancient and continuously inhabited cities in all of human history. The ziggurat of Ur, that massive, stepped pyramid of mud brick rising tier upon tier toward the heavens, crowned with a shrine dedicated to the moon god, stands even today, though much eroded by time and weather, a testament to the devotion that ancient peoples felt for Nanna. This was not merely a building but a cosmic connection point, a place where heaven and earth met, where the moon god's presence could be most directly felt and his blessings most reliably obtained. At Ur, Elaborate rituals marked the phases of the moon. When the crescent first appeared in the western sky after the period of the new moon's darkness, priests performed ceremonies celebrating Nanna's rebirth, his return from the underworld realm where he had journeyed during the moon's dark phase. As the moon waxed toward fullness, offerings increased and prayers of thanksgiving filled the temple courtyards. At the full moon, the greatest celebrations occurred, festivals that lasted for days, featuring ritual meals, sacred dances, offerings of the finest dairy products, and elaborate hymns praising the moon god's power and generosity. Each spring, the people of Ur reenacted Nanna's mythological journey to Nippur, where he visited his father Enlil, bearing the first dairy products of the year as tribute. This ritual procession, with priests carrying sacred objects, musicians playing hymns, worshippers following in devotional parade, traced an actual physical route from Ur to Nippur, a journey of over 100 miles across the Mesopotamian plains. The text known as Nanna Suen's Journey to Nippur describes this sacred pilgrimage in detail, explaining how Nanna loaded his boat with goods and travelled to his father's city to present offerings and receive blessings in return. This myth, reenacted annually through ritual, reinforced the cosmic order. Even the great moon god acknowledged his father's authority. Even Nanna brought tribute to Enlil, who held the tablets of destiny and ruled as king of the gods. In iconography, Nanna was typically depicted as an elderly man with a long flowing beard, representing wisdom accumulated through countless lunar cycles, through ages of watching the world from the night sky. He wore a headdress of 4 horns surmounted by a crescent, the horns marking divine status in Mesopotamian artistic convention, the crescent identifying him specifically as the moon god. Sometimes he appeared in his symbolic form as a bull or as a boat, for the crescent moon resembles a boat sailing through the sky, and the ancient Mesopotamians imagined Nanna literally travelling in such a vessel each night, crossing the heavens as a boatman crosses rivers. The last king of Babylon, Nabonidus, who reigned from approximately 506 to 539 BCE, attempted to elevate Sin-Nanna to the supreme position within the pantheon, placing the moon god above even Marduk, who by that late period had become the chief deity of Babylonian religion. This religious reform was deeply controversial and contributed to Nabonidus's unpopularity among the priesthood of Marduk, who saw it as an attack on their god's rightful supremacy. But it demonstrates that even in the first millennium BCE, more than 2,000 years after Nanna first appears in written records, the moon god retained such power and devotion that a king could imagine reorganizing the entire cosmic hierarchy around him. Tiamat, Nanna's influence extended beyond the borders of Mesopotamia itself. His cult was established in Haran, a city in northern Mesopotamia, in what is now southeastern Turkey, where the moon god's worship persisted well into the Christian era. Some sources suggest that devotion to the moon god at Haran continued until the 11th century CE, making Nanna one of the longest worshipped deities in human religious history. This remarkable continuity speaks to something essential about the moon's hold on human imagination. Long after the political structures that supported Sumerian religion had collapsed, long after the Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires had risen and fallen, the moon still crossed the sky each night, and people still felt moved to honor its divine presence. The Dark Queen. And now, as we follow the silver thread of Nanna's light downward, as we trace the connections between the gods of heaven and the powers that dwell beneath the earth, we must confront one of the most fearsome and misunderstood figures in all of Mesopotamian mythology, Ereshkigal, the Queen of the Dead, the goddess who rules over Irkalla, that shadowy underworld realm from which no traveller returns unchanged, if they return at all. Ereshkigal's very name carries the weight of her domain, Lady of the Great Place, or Queen of the Great Earth. Though the Great Earth she rules is not the fertile surface world, but the vast realm beneath it, the land of dust and darkness where all mortal lives eventually end. She was, according to most traditions, the older sister of Inanna, making them daughters of either Nanna and Ningal, or, in some versions, of and himself. But where Inanna chose the bright realm of heaven, the paths of love and war, the domain of the living with all its passion and complexity, Ereshkigal inherited or perhaps was exiled to the kingdom of the dead. The circumstances of how Ereshkigal came to rule the underworld vary in different traditions. Some myths suggest she was abducted by Ker, a primordial dragon or demon representing the underworld itself, and taken down to the realm of death against her will. Other versions imply that when the cosmos was divided among the gods, someone had to rule the land of the dead, and that duty fell to Ereshkigal, perhaps because she was female and thus associated with the earth's depths, perhaps simply through the lot, drawing that allocated divine responsibilities. Whatever the reason, she became the absolute monarch of that sunless realm, and her rule was characterized by stern justice, unwavering law, and an absence of mercy that reflected the fundamental nature of death itself. The underworld she governed, called Ereshkigal or Ker, sometimes described as the land of no return, was not a place of punishment in the sense that later religious traditions would develop. It was not hell, with demons tormenting the wicked for their sins, nor was it heaven, with the righteous enjoying eternal bliss. It was simply the place where the dead went, all of them, regardless of their virtue or wickedness in life. Rich and poor, king and commoner, saint and sinner, all descended to Ereshkigal's realm when their earthly lives ended, and all faced the same dim, dusty existence in the shadowy halls beneath the earth. The Mesopotamians imagined the underworld as a vast palace or city, with 7 gates that a soul must pass through on its journey down to Ereshkigal's throne room. At each gate, the deceased would be stripped of some ornament or article of clothing, some piece of their former identity, until by the time they reached the 7th gate and entered the Queen's presence, they were utterly naked, utterly vulnerable, reduced to the bare essence of what they had been in life. This stripping away was not arbitrary cruelty, but a recognition of death's levelling power. In Ereshkigal's realm, earthly status meant nothing. Earthly accomplishments carried no weight. The crown of a king and the rags of a beggar both turned to dust in that place. Ereshkigal herself was described as a terrifying figure, though the texts give us fewer physical descriptions of her than of other major deities. She sat upon a throne in her palace, surrounded by the Anunnaki in their aspect as judges of the dead, those same great gods who, in their celestial aspect, decreed the fates of the living, now served in the underworld to judge the souls of those who had passed beyond life. They were described as sitting in darkness, illuminated only by the faint light of torches or lamps, pronouncing verdicts that could not be appealed, passing sentences from which there was no reprieve. The Queen herself was subject to the same laws that governed her realm. The dead could not leave. What entered the underworld remained in the underworld. This was the fundamental law, absolute and unbreakable. Even Ereshkigal, for all her power within her domain, could not override this cosmic principle. She was not so much a tyrant imposing arbitrary rules as the embodiment of death's fundamental nature, permanent, irreversible, absolute. Yet within this grim role, Ereshkigal was not simply evil or malevolent. She was necessary. Someone had to govern the dead. Someone had to maintain order in that realm of shadows. Someone had to ensure that the boundary between life and death remained intact, that the living world did not become polluted by the dead returning, that the natural order of existence, birth, life, death continued to function as it must. Ereshkigal, in accepting this burden, performed an essential cosmic service, even if it meant she must be feared rather than loved, respected rather than celebrated. Her isolation in the underworld, separated from the bright realm of the living gods, gave her character a profound loneliness. She had power, yes, absolute power within her domain. But she was cut off from the joys that other gods experienced, the sunlight and fresh air, the feast and celebration, the freedom to move between realms. She was trapped by her own throne, bound by the same laws she enforced. This tragic dimension to Ereshkigal's nature appears most clearly in the myth of her relationship with Nergal, the god of plague and war, who would become her consort and co-ruler of the underworld. According to the myth, when the gods held a great feast in heaven, they sent a portion to Ereshkigal in the underworld, acknowledging her divine status, even though she could not leave her realm to attend. She sent her messenger Numtar to receive the offering on her behalf. But Nergal, attending the feast, failed to show proper respect to Numtar. Accounts vary on the exact nature of the insult. Ereshkigal, furious at this disrespect shown to her representative, demanded that Nergal be sent down to the underworld to answer for his offence. Nergal descended through the 7 gates, but unlike ordinary souls, he came prepared for confrontation, armed with divine power and determination. When he reached Ereshkigal's throne room, rather than submitting to judgment, he seized her by the hair and dragged her from her throne, threatening to kill her. But in that moment of violence and domination, something unexpected happened. Desire sparked between them. The myth describes their coupling in explicit detail, 7 days and 7 nights of passionate union. And when Nergal finally tried to leave, to return to the world above, Ereshkigal prevented him, demanding that he stay with her as her husband and co-ruler. In some versions, Nergal initially escapes but finds himself unable to forget the Queen of the Dead, eventually returning to her willingly. In others, she threatens to release all the dead to overwhelm the living world if he does not return to her. However the details vary, the outcome remains constant. Nergal becomes Ereshkigal's consort, and together they rule the underworld, she as queen and he as king, finally giving the dark goddess the companion she had lacked, someone to share her lonely throne. This myth reveals Ereshkigal as more than simply the stern administrator of death. She is a woman, a goddess, yes, but also a being capable of desire, loneliness, need for companionship. Her isolation has made her fierce, but beneath that fierceness lies the same capacity for connection that all conscious beings share. The story suggests that even in the realm of death, even in the darkest place in the cosmos, love can find a way to bloom. But perhaps the most important myth involving Ereshkigal is Inanna's descent to the underworld, a narrative that stands as one of the supreme achievements of Mesopotamian religious literature and one of the most profound meditations on death and transformation in all of ancient mythology. The story begins with Inanna, Queen of Heaven, deciding to descend to the underworld to attend the funeral of her sister's husband, though other versions suggest different motivations. Perhaps Inanna desired to extend her power into the realm of death itself, to rule both life and death as she ruled heaven and earth. Inanna prepares for her journey carefully, adorning herself with all the symbols of her power, her crown, her lapis beads, her breastplate, her rings, her royal robes, all 7 of them that mark her divine authority. She instructs her loyal servant Ninshaba to seek help from the great gods if she does not return within 3 days. Then she descends, approaching the first gate of the underworld and demanding entrance. The gatekeeper reports to Ereshkigal that Inanna has come, and the Queen of the Dead's response is telling. She is both enraged and curious. Why would Inanna come to her realm? What could the Queen of Heaven possibly want in the land of death? Ereshkigal orders that Inanna be admitted, but that she must pass through all 7 gates according to the ancient laws, and at each gate she must surrender something. And so Inanna's descent becomes a systematic stripping away of everything that made her powerful in the upper world. At the first gate, her crown is removed. At the second, her jewelry. At the third, her breastplate. One by one, her symbols of authority are taken from her, until finally, at the 7th gate, she stands naked and powerless before her sister's throne. Ereshkigal, sitting in judgment with the Anunnaki surrounding her, pronounces Inanna guilty of what crime the text does not clearly specify, perhaps simply of being alive in the realm of death, of being powerful where all must be powerless. The sentence is death, and it is carried out immediately. Inanna is killed and her corpse is hung upon a hook, displayed as a warning of what happens to those who challenge the sovereignty of the underworld. For 3 days and 3 nights, Inanna hangs dead in the darkness. Above, in the living world, Ninshuba fulfills her duty, going to the great gods pleading for help. Enlil refuses. Nanna refuses. Finally, she comes to Enki, the clever god of wisdom, and he devises a plan. He creates 2 strange beings, neither male nor female, neither living nor dead, and sends them down to the underworld. These beings, because they exist in a liminal state, can enter where other living creatures cannot. They find Ereshkigal in the midst of what the text describes as the pains of childbirth, moaning and suffering, a mysterious detail that some scholars interpret metaphorically, others as suggesting that death itself experiences labor pains, bringing forth new souls into its realm. The strange beings offer Ereshkigal compassion, echoing her groans of pain, sympathizing with her suffering. Touched by this unexpected empathy for whoever shows compassion to the Queen of Death, Ereshkigal offers them a gift. They request Inanna's corpse. Reluctantly, bound by her own word, Ereshkigal allows them to revive Inanna with the water of life and food of life that Enki has provided. But here comes the crucial limitation. The laws of the underworld cannot be entirely broken. If Inanna ascends, someone must take her place. She may leave, but only if she provides a substitute. And so Inanna rises through the 7 gates, reclaiming her power at each one, returning to the world above. When she emerges, she finds her beloved consort Dumuzi sitting on her throne, apparently unconcerned by her absence, not mourning her disappearance. Enraged by this lack of devotion, Inanna designates Dumuzi as her substitute, and the demons of the underworld seize him and drag him down to Ereshkigal's realm. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Dumuzi will spend half the year in the underworld, and his sister Geshtananna will spend the other half there in his place, allowing him to return to the world above for 6 months of each year. This cycle becomes the mythological explanation for the seasons. When Dumuzi is in the underworld, the earth mourns and becomes barren. When he returns, life and fertility return with him. Through all of this, Ereshkigal remains the constant center, the unmoved mover around whom all others orbit. She enforces the law. She maintains the boundary. She ensures that death remains death, that the natural order persists despite the desires of the living gods and the schemes of the clever ones. Without her stern governance, chaos would result. The living and dead would intermingle, the boundary between realms would collapse, the fundamental structure of existence would unravel. And so we honor her, even as we fear her. We recognize Ereshkigal's necessity, even as we hope to delay our own journey to her realm. She is the dark goddess, the shadow sister, the queen who rules a kingdom. None wish to enter, but all must eventually acknowledge. In her mythology, The Mesopotamians confronted the reality of death with remarkable honesty. No pleasant afterlife myths to soften the blow, no promises of resurrection or eternal reward, simply the acknowledgement that death comes to all, that the underworld receives all, that Ereshkigal's rule is absolute and eternal. And yet, in accepting this harsh truth, they found a kind of peace, a recognition that even death is part of the cosmic order, that even the realm of shadows has its goddess, its laws, its place in the great pattern that the Anunnaki established when they separated heaven from earth and brought forth the light. The champion of order. And now, as we move forward through the ages of Mesopotamian religion, as we trace the evolution of divine power from the ancient Sumerian cities through the rise of Babylonian dominance, we encounter a transformation in the cosmic order itself, a shift so profound that it would reshape the entire pantheon and establish a new king of the gods, a champion who would rise from relative obscurity to claim the highest throne in heaven. This is the story of Marduk, the great god of Babylon, whose ascension represents not merely a change in religious devotion, but a complete reimagining of how the cosmos came into being and how order emerged victorious over the primordial forces of chaos. Marduk's rise to supreme power is inseparable from the political fortunes of Babylon itself, that magnificent city that would become the jewel of Mesopotamia, whose very name, Babili, Gate of the Gods, proclaimed its sacred significance. In the 3rd millennium BCE, during the height of Sumerian civilization, Marduk was barely mentioned in the texts, appearing only as a minor deity associated with incantations and magical formulas, a god of secondary importance whose worship was confined primarily to the city of Babylon, when that city was itself merely one settlement among many in the complex patchwork of Mesopotamian city-states. But as Babylon grew in political and economic power, particularly during the reign of Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, Marduk's divine status grew correspondingly, until by the 1st millennium BCE he had become Bel the Lord, the supreme deity of the entire Mesopotamian world, the king whose authority superseded even that of Enlil, the ancient ruler of the gods. This was not merely religious innovation or theological speculation. It was a conscious reshaping of cosmic mythology to reflect and legitimize earthly power, a brilliant example of how religion and politics interweave in the ancient world to create narratives that serve both spiritual and pragmatic purposes. The priests and scribes of Babylon, working in service to their increasingly powerful kings, crafted a new creation, epic, the Enuma Elish, meaning when on high, named for its opening words, that would establish Marduk not as a latecomer to divinity, but as the hero who saved the gods themselves and earned his supremacy through valor, wisdom, and creative power beyond anything the older deities could claim. But before we can understand Marduk's triumph, before we can appreciate the magnitude of what he accomplished and why the Babylonians elevated him to such heights, we must first meet his adversary, the being whose defeat would establish the cosmos itself, and whose body would become the raw material from which heaven and earth were fashioned. We must descend into the time before time, into the primordial waters where chaos reigned supreme, where the first stirrings of consciousness emerged from infinite potential, where Tiamat, ancient, terrible, magnificent Tiamat, held sway over an undifferentiated universe that knew neither order nor form, neither light nor darkness, because such distinctions had not yet been born from her infinite depths. Marduk's lineage connected him directly to the ancient power structures we have already explored, making his eventual supremacy a kind of family succession, a grandson claiming what perhaps his grandfather felt should have been his own birthright from the beginning. Marduk was the son of Enki, called Ea in the Akkadian language, that clever god of wisdom and water whom we encountered in our journey through the Anunnaki. His mother was Damkina, a goddess associated with the earth and with creative power. This parentage gave Marduk access to Enki's legendary wisdom and magical knowledge, the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems, to find paths where others encountered only walls. From his father, Marduk inherited cleverness, adaptability, the capacity to outthink opponents rather than simply overpower them through brute force. The descriptions of Marduk in ancient texts emphasize his extraordinary nature from the moment of his birth. The Enuma Elish tells us that he was formed in a special chamber within the cosmic waters, fashioned with particular care and attention by his divine parents. He was born with 4 eyes, 2 in front and 2 behind, allowing him to see in all directions simultaneously, to perceive threats and opportunities from every angle without blind spots or vulnerabilities. He had 4 ears as well, capable of hearing whispers from the most distant corners of creation, able to detect conspiracies before they could mature into threats, to overhear prayers before they were fully articulated. When he opened his mouth, fire blazed forth, demonstrating his connection to the destructive and purifying power of flame. His limbs were perfect, his form magnificent, his very presence radiating such power that even the elder gods marveled at what had been born into their midst. From his earliest youth, Marduk was given winds to play with. His father Ea created the 4 winds and placed them in his son's hands like toys, but toys with cosmic significance, forces of nature made subject to divine will. Marduk delighted in these gifts, setting the winds in motion, watching them swirl and dance, creating waves upon the waters of the primordial sea. This play, innocent though it might have seemed, would have consequences that would shake the foundations of existence itself and set in motion the chain of events that would lead to Marduk's ultimate test and triumph. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. Do you ever wonder how order emerges from chaos in your own life? How the swirling confusion of possibilities and potentials eventually resolves into definite forms and structures? The ancient Babylonians understood this process not as automatic or inevitable, but as requiring conscious effort, requiring a champion willing to impose order even when chaos resists, even when the cost might be tremendous. Their creation myth is not really about the beginning of the physical universe. It is about the eternal struggle between organization and entropy, between meaning and meaninglessness, between cosmos and chaos. The primordial mother. And so we come to Tiamat, whose name itself carries multiple meanings in the ancient languages. Salt water, sea, the bitter waters of the ocean, but also chaos, the primordial deep, the infinite potential that existed before form, before distinction, before the painful but necessary divisions that would create the world as we know it. Tiamat was not originally a goddess in the sense we have encountered with Inanna or Ninhushag, not a personality with desires and intentions and a role in the divine society. Rather, she was, or perhaps we should say, she is, for such primordial forces exist beyond the categories of past and present, the very substance of undifferentiated existence, the cosmic ocean of salt water that represented 1/2 of the fundamental duality from which all things would eventually emerge. One high. In the Enuma Elish, the story begins in the ultimate simplicity. When on high the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name, naught but primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mummu, Tiamat, she who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body. Picture this moment, or rather, this timeless state that cannot properly be called a moment because time itself had not yet been invented. Apsu, the fresh water, the sweet underground ocean that we encountered as Enki's domain, and Tiamat, the salt water of the endless seas, lay intermingled, their waters mixed together in an infinite, undifferentiated unity. There was no separation between fresh and salt, no boundary between male and female principles, no distinction between above and below. Everything was one, and that one was water, in its most fundamental, most encompassing sense, not the mere chemical compound, but the principle of infinite potential, of formlessness that contains all possible forms within itself. From this mingling of waters, from the union of Apsu and Tiamat, the first gods began to emerge, born like thoughts arising in an infinite mind, like ripples forming on the surface of an eternal ocean. First came Lahmu and Lahamu, gods whose names suggest the silt or the hairy ones, representing the first solid matter precipitating out of the primordial solution. From them came Anshar and Kishar, the horizons of sky and earth, the first hint of spatial organization, the beginning of up and down, of direction and dimension. And from Anshar came Anu, our familiar An, the sky god, and from Anu came Aya, and so the generations of gods proceeded, each one more defined, more particular, more organized than the one before, moving steadily from infinite chaos toward finite order, from pure potential toward actualized being. But this process of generation, this birth of order from chaos, created noise and disturbance in the primordial waters. The young gods were active, energetic, constantly moving and playing and creating new things, and their activities churned the waters of Tiamat, preventing the ancient peace, disturbing the eternal silence that had existed before. Consciousness emerged to trouble it. Apsu found this intolerable. The freshwater god, accustomed to infinite quiet, to the deep stillness of the underground ocean, could not bear the constant commotion of his divine descendants. He complained to Tiamat, "Their ways have become very grievous to me. By day I cannot rest, by night I cannot sleep. I will destroy them and put an end to their ways, that silence may be restored and we may sleep." This is one of the most chilling moments in ancient mythology. A father proposing to murder his children simply because they disturb his rest, simply because their very existence creates noise and motion and change in a universe that had known only stasis. It reveals something profound about the nature of chaos. It seeks to return to itself, to unmake distinction, to dissolve all boundaries back into the primordial unity. The emergence of order is violence against chaos, and chaos, when it awakens to consciousness, fights back against the pain of differentiation. But Tiamat, hearing Apsu's proposal, responded with resistance. Not yet warlike, not yet the terrible dragon she would become, but with the protective instinct of a mother who, despite the inconvenience and noise her children create, cannot countenance their destruction. "How can we destroy what we ourselves have created?" she asked, pleading for patience, for tolerance, for allowing the young gods to continue their existence despite the disruption they caused. This moment reveals Tiamat's complexity. She is chaos, yes, but she is also mother, creator, the source from which all things emerge. She contains within herself both the impulse to unmake and the impulse to nurture, both the desire for undifferentiated peace and the capacity to love what has differentiated itself from her. But Apsu would not be dissuaded. He took counsel with Mumu, his vizier, a mysterious figure representing perhaps fog or mist, the confused state between water and air, and together they plotted the destruction of the young gods. Yet the gods themselves, blessed with divine knowledge and foresight, learned of this conspiracy. And it was Ea, the wise one, the clever one, the god who would become father to Marduk, who acted decisively to prevent the catastrophe. Using his mastery of magical incantations, Ea cast a spell of sleep upon Apsu, causing the freshwater god to fall into a slumber so deep it could not be broken. And then, while Apsu slept, Ea killed him, taking the freshwater realm for himself, establishing his dwelling place in the Abzu that had once belonged to his great-grandfather, transforming patricide into inheritance, murder into succession. This victory seemed complete. The threat had been neutralized. The young gods could continue their noisy existence unmolested by the primordial forces that preceded them. In his new palace in the Abzu, Ea lived with his wife Damkina, and there, in the chamber where Apsu had once held court, Marduk was conceived and born. The next generation, the one who would complete the transition from chaos to order, who would finish what his father had begun. But Tiamat had not forgotten. The mother of all things who had pleaded for her children's lives when Apsu threatened them, now found herself bereaved, her consort murdered, the primordial unity shattered beyond repair. And there were others who whispered in her ear, who played upon her grief and transformed it into rage. The ancient gods, those who had been born in the first generations when creation was still close to chaos, came to Tiamat with their complaints. They told her that Ea had committed an unforgivable crime, that the young gods were arrogant and disrespectful, that the old order must be restored through whatever means necessary. They goaded her, manipulated her, transformed her grief into wrath, and her sorrow into determination for revenge. And so Tiamat, who had defended the young gods against Apsu's murderous intent, now turned against them with all the terrible power of the primordial deep. She became something she had never been before, not merely the passive ocean but an active force of destruction, a conscious will bent on unmaking what she had made, on returning the cosmos to the undifferentiated unity from which it had emerged. The texts describe her transformation with awe and terror. She gave birth to monsters, to serpents with venom instead of blood, to dragons that inspire fear in all who behold them, to fishmen and scorpion men and creatures that combine elements in impossible and horrifying ways. She created 11 types of monsters in total, an army of chaos made flesh, beings that embodied the principle of disorder, the refusal of nature to respect categories and boundaries. To lead this army, Tiamat elevated Kingu, one of the ancient gods, making him her new consort and giving him the Tablet of Destinies. Those sacred objects we have encountered before, the cosmic law code that whoever possesses has the authority to decree the fates of all beings. By bestowing this tablet upon Kingu, Tiamat was making a declaration: the old order would be restored, chaos would reclaim its supremacy, and the young gods who had murdered Apsu and disturbed the primordial peace would be destroyed utterly and forever. When word of Tiamat's preparations reached the young gods, terror spread through their ranks like fire through dry grass. The cosmic war was coming, and they knew with the certainty that gods possess that they were facing not merely another deity, but the principle of chaos itself, the force that preceded form, the ocean that could drown all order and return existence to infinite, undifferentiated potential. Ea, who had defeated Apsu, could not defeat Tiamat. Her power was too great, her nature too fundamental. One by one, the gods tried to devise strategies, to find champions, to identify some means of resistance. But each plan dissolved in the face of Tiamat's overwhelming force. None of the elder gods possessed the power to stand against the primordial mother when she had finally roused herself to war. And then Ea remembered his son, Marduk, born in the conquered palace of Apsu, formed with such care, blessed with 4 eyes and 4 ears and the breath of flame, given the winds to play with as a child plays with toys. Marduk, who represented the next generation, the future, the principle of order made conscious and active and willing to fight for its existence. Ea went to his son and explained the situation. Tiamat was coming with her army of monsters. The gods had no defense. The very existence of the ordered cosmos hung in the balance. Would Marduk be their champion? Would he face the dragon goddess and fight on behalf of order against chaos? The price of kingship. Marduk considered the request. He was young among the gods, not yet granted the highest honours, not yet seated among the supreme council. The elder deities had their positions, their authorities, their sacred prerogatives. Enlil held the Tablet of Destinies, or had held them before Tiamat gave them to Kingu. Anu ruled the heavens. Each god had their domain and their status carefully defined by tradition and precedent. But now they needed Marduk, needed his strength and courage and the special qualities his parents had built into him from his conception. This gave him leverage, and Marduk, whether through his father's inherited cleverness or through his own native wisdom, understood exactly how to use it. "I will be your champion," Marduk declared to the assembled gods. "I will face Tiamat and her army of monsters. I will fight on behalf of order against chaos, on behalf of the cosmos you have created against the primordial forces that seek to unmake it. But I have one condition, one price for my service." The gods leaned forward, anxious and desperate. What would this young god demand? What could they possibly refuse him when their very existence hung in the balance? "If I am victorious," Marduk continued, "if I defeat Tiamat and save you all from destruction, then I must be made king of the gods. My word must become supreme. My decrees must be unalterable. When I speak, let my commands immediately lower or raise the gods. Let my word, like that of Anu, establish what cannot be changed. Let no god transgress my pronouncements." He was demanding nothing less than absolute supremacy, the replacement of the entire existing hierarchy with himself at the apex, the relegation of Enlil and Anu and all the ancient powers to secondary status beneath his throne. The gods conferred among themselves. Some surely resented this upstart demanding such honour. Others recognized the justice of his claim. If he would risk everything to save them, should he not be rewarded with everything? But ultimately, pragmatism won out over pride. What good would their ancient honours be if Tiamat destroyed them all? What value had status in a cosmos that was about to be unmade and returned to primordial chaos? And so they agreed, swearing oaths that if Marduk proved victorious, he would be elevated to the kingship of heaven, his authority would supersede all others, his word would become cosmic law. To test his power, and to demonstrate that their promise was real, the gods placed a garment in the midst of their assembly. They told Marduk, "Command it to vanish, and if it vanishes, command it to appear again, and if it appears, then we will know that your word possesses the power to decree destinies." Marduk spoke, and the garment disappeared. He spoke again, and it reappeared exactly as it had been. The gods rejoiced and declared, "Marduk is king." Even before the battle, even before the test of combat, they acknowledged his supremacy, bound themselves to honour him if he should prove victorious. And so Marduk prepared for war. He armed himself with weapons that seem to us almost absurd in their variety and abundance. But each one represents a different aspect of the forces he could command. Each one symbolises a principle of order that would be deployed against chaos. He carried a bow and arrows, weapons that strike from a distance, that impose the archer's will upon targets beyond reach. He wielded a mace, the weapon of direct confrontation, of smashing force applied at close range. He crafted lightning as a weapon, harnessing the storm's fury and making it serve his purpose. He created a net held by 4 winds at its corners, a trap to ensnare and contain what otherwise might escape. Most importantly, he commanded the winds themselves, not just the 4 winds his father had given him as playthings, but 7 winds in total: the evil wind, the whirlwind, the hurricane, the 4-fold wind, the 7-fold wind, the whirlwind that has no mercy. These winds would be his primary weapons. the forces through which order would impose itself upon chaos, through which form would be carved from formlessness. Picture the moment of confrontation, Marduk in his divine chariot, blazing with light and power, surrounded by winds that howl and shriek, armed with weapons both physical and elemental, advancing toward the primordial sea where Tiamat waits with her army of monsters. She is vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond measure, terrible beyond description. In some traditions, she takes the form of a dragon, a serpent of cosmic proportions whose coils could encircle the world if the world existed yet. In others, she remains formless water, the ocean itself given consciousness and will and deadly intent. Either way, she represents the greatest threat to order's existence, the return of chaos, the unmaking of all distinctions and boundaries and categories. Kingu and the 11 monsters array themselves before Tiamat, preparing to defend their mother goddess and destroy the champion of the young gods. But Marduk does not attack immediately. First, he challenges Tiamat directly, calling her out, accusing her of betraying her own children, of allowing grief to transform into rage, of choosing destruction over creation. "You have created evil and wicked things," he shouts across the cosmic battlefield. "You have elevated Kingu and given him what belongs to Anu. You have plotted evil against the gods, my fathers. Let your army prepare. Let your weapons be girded, and then come, you and I. Let us engage in single combat." Tiamat accepts the challenge. She roars, a sound that shakes the foundations of the half-formed cosmos, a bellow of primal fury that echoes through all realms. She opens her mouth to swallow Marduk, to take him back into the undifferentiated waters of chaos from which all things emerged. But Marduk was waiting for precisely this moment, the instant when chaos would make itself vulnerable through its own aggression. He commands the winds to enter Tiamat's mouth, to rush down her throat and inflate her body from within, to turn her own vastness against her. The evil wind enters first, followed by the others, and Tiamat's body begins to swell, to expand, to become taut and distended as the winds fill her interior spaces. Sieke, unable to close her mouth, helpless against the wind's invasion, Tiamat becomes vulnerable to Marduk's final assault. He shoots an arrow into her gaping mouth, and the arrow, guided by divine purpose, empowered by the determination to impose order upon chaos, pierces through her throat and enters her heart, splitting her from within. The primordial goddess, wounded unto death, sags in the cosmic waters. Her vast body, held rigid by the winds that fill her, becomes still. The first mother, the saltwater ocean from which all things came, dies at the hands of her great-great-great-grandson, killed to make the world possible, sacrificed so that order might triumph over chaos. The 11 monsters, seeing their leader fallen, attempt to flee. But Marduk has prepared for this as well. He casts his net, and the winds hold it wide, capturing the monsters before they can escape back into the primordial waters. He tramples them beneath his feet, takes them as trophies, breaks their weapons and binds them like prisoners. Kingu, who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, is captured and stripped of his stolen authority. The tablet is taken from him and given to Anu, restoring the proper order, reclaiming for the organized cosmos the power to decree destinies rather than allowing chaos to determine fate. But Marduk is not finished. The death of Tiamat is not merely the end of a threat. It is the beginning of creation. Standing over the corpse of the primordial goddess, Marduk conceives a plan of staggering audacity and creativity. He will not simply dispose of Tiamat's body, he will not waste this vast accumulation of primordial substance. Instead, he will use it, will transform chaos itself into the raw material of the ordered cosmos, will make from destruction the foundation of construction, the fashioning of the world. And so Marduk splits Tiamat's vast body in two, like a fisherman preparing his catch, like a craftsman dividing his material for different purposes. He takes one half of her body and raises it high, establishing it as the dome of heaven, the sky that arches over all things. He sets guards to watch this heavenly ocean, commanding them to ensure that Tiamat's waters, even in death, even transformed into the sky, do not escape and flood the earth below. From the other half of her body, Marduk fashions the earth itself, the solid ground upon which life will walk, the foundation of the physical world. Jumbalesh. From Tiamat's eyes, which once glared with primordial rage, Marduk releases the waters that become the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, those twin arteries that would give life to Mesopotamian civilization, that would irrigate the fields and sustain the cities, that would make human culture possible in the harsh landscape between the rivers. The ancient Babylonians, watching these great rivers flow, understood that they were witnessing not merely natural phenomena, but the ongoing transformation of chaos into order, the continuous gift of Tiamat's substance made life-giving rather than life-destroying. Number C. From Tiamat's tail, Marduk creates the clouds that bring rain. From her teats flow the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates at the headwaters far to the north. From her ribs he fashions mountains and hills. From her various body parts, all the features of the physical world emerge, not created from nothing but transformed from chaos, given form and function and fixed position in the cosmic order. This is crucial to understanding the Babylonian worldview. Creation is not emergence from void, but organization of pre-existing substance, the imposition of order upon chaos, the transformation of infinite potential into finite actuality. Having organized the physical world, Marduk turns his attention to the heavens. He establishes the stations of the great gods in the sky, creating the constellations, assigning the stars their positions and their movements. He defines the year and divides it into months. He creates the moon, Inanna, whom we have already met in his mythological aspect, here becomes also a physical object set in the heavens, and gives it authority over the night, instructing it to wax and wane in regular cycles, to mark time through its visible transformations. The moon becomes a calendar for humanity, a divine clock visible to all, ensuring that everyone can track the passage of days and months, can anticipate festivals and planting seasons, can organize their lives according to cosmic rather than merely personal rhythms. File. But the work is not yet complete. The gods gather to praise Marduk's accomplishments, marveling at how he has transformed Tiamat's corpse into a functioning cosmos, how he has made order from chaos through strength and wisdom combined. Yet there remains a problem. The same problem that had driven the original crisis. The gods still need servants to perform the labor of maintaining the cosmos, still require someone to dig canals and tend fields, to make offerings at temples and perform the rituals that keep the divine realm and earthly realm in proper relationship. Marduk consults with his father Ea, for wisdom is still valuable even when one has become king of the gods, and a wise ruler seeks counsel from those with experience and knowledge. Together they devise a solution that will both punish the guilty and resolve the labor shortage. They will create humanity from the blood of the god who most directly caused the crisis. They summon Kingu, who had led Tiamat's army, who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, who had committed himself to the cause of chaos against order. He is judged guilty, condemned to death, and his blood is shed for a sacred purpose. From Kingu's blood divine substance, the essence of a god mixed with clay as Ninhursag and Enki had done in the older Sumerian traditions, Ea fashions Lulu, the first human, the prototype of the species that would be called to serve the gods and maintain the ordered cosmos. The text is explicit about humanity's purpose. Ea created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. We are not, in this vision, the crown of creation made in the divine image for our own sake. We are substitute workers, created specifically to relieve the gods of burdensome labor, shaped from the blood of a condemned rebel as both punishment for his crimes and solution to a cosmic problem. This might seem harsh or diminishing to modern sensibilities, but the Babylonians understood it differently. To be created from divine substance, even the substance of a condemned god, was to share in divinity. To serve the gods was not slavery but participation in the cosmic order, a sacred duty that gave human life meaning and purpose beyond mere survival or pleasure. Every act of labor ploughing a field, building a temple, digging a canal, became a ritual reenactment of humanity's essential nature, a fulfillment of the purpose for which we were created. In gratitude for their liberation from labor, and in honor of their new king, the gods proposed to build a great city and temple for Marduk. For a full year they labor, making bricks from the clay of the newly created earth, constructing a magnificent complex that will serve as Marduk's earthly dwelling place and the center of his worship. This city is Babylon itself, and the temple, the Ereshkigal, House of the Raised Head, becomes the model for all sacred architecture in Mesopotamia, the prototype of the ziggurat, that stepped pyramid reaching toward heaven that would characterize Mesopotamian religious building for millennia to come. The ziggurat of Babylon, called Annunaki, Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, rose tier upon tier until it seemed to touch the sky itself, a mountain built by human hands according to divine specification, connecting the realm below with the realm above, making a place where God and human could meet, where the cosmic order could be renewed through ritual and sacrifice. This was the building that would later inspire the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, though in the biblical version it represents human pride and divine punishment, while in its original Babylonian context it represented divine blessing and humanity's sacred purpose. Mars. With the physical cosmos established and the human workforce created, one task remains: the formal elevation of Marduk to his promised kingship and the full definition of his authority. The gods gather for a great banquet, a feast celebrating victory over chaos and the successful establishment of the ordered world. They take their seats according to rank 50 great gods joining the assembly, and they begin the ritual of bestowing names upon Marduk, defining his authority through the accumulation of titles and epithets. This is one of the most remarkable sections of the Enuma Elish. The gods give Marduk 50 names, each one representing an aspect of his power, a domain of his authority, a quality of his divine nature. Some of these names are taken from older gods whose functions Marduk is absorbing, including the name of Enlil himself, signifying that Marduk now holds the authority that once belonged to the king of the Sumerian pantheon. The number 50 itself is significant, for 50 was Enlil's sacred number, and by receiving 50 names, Marduk was being explicitly identified as Enlil's replacement, the new holder of kingship over gods and mortals alike. This long recitation of names serves multiple purposes. Theologically, it establishes Marduk's comprehensive authority over all aspects of existence. He is not merely king, but farmer god, warrior god, judge god, magician god, creator god, all functions unified in his single person. Politically, it demonstrates the subordination of all other gods to his authority. They are the ones speaking his names, acknowledging his supremacy, surrendering their independent status to become aspects of his unified rule. Ritually, it provides the text for annual recitation during the Babylonian New Year festival, when the Enuma Elish would be chanted in its entirety, renewing the cosmic order through the repetition of the primordial victory over chaos. And so the cosmos is established. Order triumphs over chaos, and Marduk, son of Ea, grandson of Anu, great-great-great-grandson of Tiamat herself, sits upon the highest throne in heaven and rules from his temple in Babylon, king of gods and patron of the greatest city in Mesopotamia. The world exists because he fought for it. Humanity serves because he decreed it. The stars move in their courses because he set them there. Every river that flows, every rain that falls, every harvest that ripens, all of it traces back to that primordial moment when the young champion faced the ancient dragon, when order confronted chaos, when Marduk split Tiamat's body and fashioned from her corpse the entire structure of reality we inhabit. The Enuma Elish ends not with Marduk's victory, but with its ongoing consequences, with the establishment of festivals and rituals that will ensure the cosmic order remains stable, with instructions for how humanity must serve the gods to maintain the delicate balance between order and the chaos that always threatens to return. For the Babylonians understood something profound: chaos was not defeated once and for all, not eliminated from existence. Tiamat's body became the world, which means chaos remains the foundation, the substance from which order is continuously fashioned. The battle must be fought again and again, not in physical combat, but in ritual reenactment, in the daily choice to maintain order rather than allow entropy's return, in the sacred work of keeping the cosmos functioning as Marduk designed it when he transformed his great-great-great-grandmother's corpse into heaven and earth. And perhaps this is the deepest wisdom of the myth, that creation is not a single event in the distant past but an ongoing process, that we participate in it through every act of organization and construction, through every choice for cosmos over chaos, through every moment we impose meaning upon what might otherwise remain meaningless, form upon what might otherwise remain formless. Marduk's victory is our victory, renewed daily, maintained through effort and will and sacred purpose. The dragon is dead, but dragons never entirely die. They transform, they become the world we inhabit, and in inhabiting that world we dwell forever in the tension between the order Marduk established and the chaos Tiamat represents, both necessary, both eternal, both woven into the very fabric of our existence. The eternal return. And so, as our journey through the pantheon of the Anunnaki draws to its close, as we have traced the threads of divine power from An's highest heaven, down through Enlil's separating winds, through Enki's deep waters of wisdom and Inanna's passionate complexity, through Ninhursag's nurturing earth and Utu's revealing light, through Nanna's silver cycles and Ereshkigal's dark necessity, finally arriving at Marduk's triumphant ordering of chaos itself, we find ourselves standing not at an ending but at a threshold, a liminal space between ancient wisdom and present understanding, between gods. These myths, preserved on clay tablets buried beneath desert sands and painstakingly decoded by scholars who devoted their lives to reading languages dead for millennia, speak to something that transcends their historical moment, something that refuses to be confined to the Bronze Age cities where they were first told. The Anunnaki were not merely explanations for natural phenomena, though they were that too, accounting for why the sun crosses the sky and why the moon waxes and wanes, why rivers flood and crops grow, why storms rage and calms return. They were not merely political propaganda, though they served that function as well, legitimizing kings and cities through divine favor, justifying conquests through cosmic mandate. They were, in their deepest essence, attempts to map the territory of existence itself, to give names and faces and stories to the fundamental forces that shape our lives whether we acknowledge them or not. The Mesopotamians understood something that our modern world, with all its scientific knowledge and technological sophistication, sometimes forgets: that human beings need stories, need narratives that connect the mundane details of daily existence to larger patterns of meaning, need to see ourselves as participants in dramas that extend beyond our individual lifespans into the realm of the eternal, When a Sumerian farmer planted barley in the fields around Ur, he was not merely performing an agricultural task. He was reenacting Enlil's separation of heaven and earth, participating in the ongoing creation of order from chaos, fulfilling the purpose for which Enki and Ninhursag had fashioned humanity from clay and divine blood. Every act of labor became sacred through this understanding, every moment of existence connected to the cosmic order. This is perhaps the most persistent theme running through all the myths we have explored, the idea that humanity exists to serve the gods, that we were created as substitute workers to relieve divine beings of burdensome toil, that our purpose is defined not by our own desires but by our role in maintaining the cosmos. To modern ears, accustomed to narratives of individual autonomy and self-determination, this might sound oppressive, demeaning. We want to be told that we are the crown of creation, made in the divine image, destined for greatness and autonomy. The Mesopotamians offered no such comfort. You are workers, they said. You exist to serve. Your life has meaning insofar as you fulfill the function for which you were designed. Yet there is a strange dignity in this harsh truth, a recognition that meaning comes not from asserting our independence, but from accepting our place within a larger order, from acknowledging that we are part of something greater than ourselves. The Mesopotamians did not suffer from the existential anxiety that plagues modern consciousness, the terror of meaninglessness, the burden of having to create our own purpose in an indifferent universe. They knew their purpose, they understood their place, and in that understanding they found not imprisonment but liberation, not degradation but significance. Consider how these myths address the ultimate human concerns that philosophy and religion have grappled with throughout history. The question of origins, where did we come from? The Anunnaki answer, from the separation of primordial unity into productive duality, from the division of chaos into ordered categories, from the mixing of divine essence with earthly substance. The question of purpose, why are we here? To maintain the cosmos, to serve the forces that sustain existence, to participate in the ongoing work of keeping order from collapsing back into chaos. The question of death, what happens when we die? We descend to Ereshkigal's realm, stripped of our earthly identities, reduced to our essential selves, joining the great democracy of the dead where king and commoner share the same dusty fate. These are not easy answers. They offer no comforting promises of eternal reward, no assurances that virtue will be vindicated or injustice punished in some afterlife. The underworld receives all equally, regardless of merit. Death is not a transition to something better, but simply an ending, a descent into shadow. Yet the Mesopotamians faced this truth without despair, without the need to invent pleasant fictions to soften death's finality. They looked into the darkness and named it Ereshkigal, gave it form and law and necessary function. By acknowledging death's reality, they were freed to focus on life's possibilities, to find meaning not in some distant future, but in the present moment, in the daily acts of service and creation that connected them to the divine order. And what of the gods themselves? What do they teach us beyond their explicit functions as forces of nature and civilization? They teach us, I think, about the complexity of power, about how authority and wisdom do not always align, about how even the highest beings can err and must face consequences, about how relationships between parents and children, between siblings, between lovers, between rulers and subjects, shape the cosmos as surely as any act of creation or destruction. And distance teaches us about the nature of ultimate authority, how the highest powers often operate through delegation rather than direct intervention. Enlil's transformation from transgressor to king demonstrates that even those who violate the old order can become pillars of the new one if they accept the journey through consequence and emerge transformed. Enki's cleverness shows us that wisdom sometimes means bending rules rather than breaking them, finding solutions that preserve life even when strict justice might demand destruction. Inanna's passion and ambition reveal that desire itself can be a creative force, that the hunger for power and pleasure and experience drives the universe forward even when it creates complications and conflicts. Ninhursag's motherhood encompasses both nurturing and withholding, both creation and the refusal to create, acknowledging that fertility is not constant but cyclical, not always generous but sometimes harsh and demanding. Utu's justice illuminates everything equally, showing us that true judgment requires complete knowledge, that nothing can hide from light, that truth emerges not through force, but through revelation. Nanna's cycles teach us about the necessity of absence as well as presence, about how fullness and emptiness alternate in eternal rhythm, about how disappearance is not abandonment, but preparation for return. Ereshkigal's dark necessity reminds us that some functions must be performed even when they inspire fear, that boundaries must be maintained even when they cause suffering, that the realm of death serves the living by remaining separate from them. And Marduk, youngest of the gods we have explored but ultimately supreme, demonstrates that sometimes the old order must be challenged and overthrown, that new champions must rise to face new threats, that authority must be earned through action rather than simply inherited through tradition. His victory over Tiamat represents not the destruction of chaos, but its transformation into cosmos, not the elimination of the primordial forces, but their reorganization into forms that serve life rather than threatening it. This transformation, chaos into order, potential into actuality, the formless into the formed, stands as the central act of all Mesopotamian mythology, the pattern that repeats at every level from cosmic creation down to individual human lives. Every time we organize our thoughts, we repeat Marduk's victory. Every time we impose structure on our days, we participate in Enlil's separation of heaven and earth. Every time we create something new, we channel Enki's wisdom. Every time we love passionately, we invoke Inanna. Every time we nurture life, we embody Ninhursag. Every time we seek truth, we follow Utu. Every time we accept natural cycles, we honor Nanna. Every time we acknowledge limitation and loss, we bow to Ereshkigal's necessity. The Anunnaki, then, were never merely external powers to be appeased through sacrifice and prayer. They were, and remain, the forces within us and around us, the principles by which existence organizes itself, the patterns that repeat across all scales of being. To study their myths is not to engage in mere historical curiosity or anthropological documentation. It is to encounter ourselves reflected in the oldest surviving mirror of human consciousness, to recognize that the concerns that drove Mesopotamian priests to compose these texts are the same concerns that drive us today: how to create meaning in a universe that does not automatically provide it, how to maintain order against entropy's constant pressure, how to find our place in patterns larger than ourselves, how to accept our mortality while still living with purpose and passion. The tablets are silent now. The temples have crumbled into tells and mounds scattered across Iraq and Syria. The last person to worship An or Enlil or Inanna as living gods died more than 1,000 years ago. The cities where the Anunnaki were honored, Ur and Uruk, Nippur and Eridu, Babylon with its ziggurat reaching toward heaven, exist now only as archaeological sites, layers of brick and pottery and broken seals waiting to be excavated and interpreted by scholars. The languages in which these myths were first told, Sumerian with its agglutinative grammar, Akkadian with its Semitic roots, are spoken by no one, existing only in dictionaries and grammar books, in the specialized knowledge of Assyriologists who dedicate careers to resurrecting dead tongues. And yet these gods refuse to remain silent. They speak to us still through the stories that have survived, through the patterns they established that continue to shape how we think about power and creation, justice and desire, life and death. When we tell stories about heroes defeating monsters and creating worlds from their bodies, we echo Marduk and Tiamat. When we speak of floods that destroy corrupt civilizations but preserve righteous survivors, we remember Enlil's wrath and Enki's mercy. When we imagine descents into underworlds where travelers are stripped of their power and forced to confront death itself, we retrace Inanna's footsteps through Ereshkigal's 7 gates. The archetypes persist. The patterns endure. The gods, in this sense, have achieved a kind of immortality more lasting than any they granted to their mortal servants. So, as you return from this journey through the ancient pantheon, as you step back from the realm of myth into the realm of daily existence, consider carrying something of what you have encountered here. Not belief in these gods as literal beings dwelling in physical heavens. That kind of belief served its historical moment and has passed into history. But rather an awareness of the forces they represent, the patterns they embody, the wisdom they preserve about how to live as conscious beings in a universe that combines order and chaos, meaning and absurdity, creation and destruction in eternal dynamic tension. When you face choices between strict justice and flexible mercy, remember Enlil and Enki. When you struggle to balance ambition with compassion, invoke Inanna. When you create or nurture or sustain life, honor Ninhursag. When you seek truth in confusion, call upon Utu. When you accept cycles of presence and absence, waxing and waning, fullness and emptiness, you walk with Nanna. When you must acknowledge endings and limitations and the final darkness that awaits all living things, you stand in Ereshkigal's presence. And when you must organize chaos into order, transform potential into actuality, fight for the possibility of meaning against the entropy that threatens to dissolve all structure back into primordial nothingness, then you become Marduk, champion of cosmos, defender of form, creator of worlds from the substance of dragons. The Anunnaki were the first gods, the oldest deities whose names we can speak with any certainty. The primordial powers who emerged when humanity first learned to write and chose to record not merely economic transactions and royal genealogies, but the stories that explained why anything exists at all rather than nothing. They were also, in a profound sense, the last gods, the culmination of a way of understanding divinity that would be transformed but never entirely superseded by the monotheistic traditions that followed, that would influence Greek mythology and biblical literature and religious thinking throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. 5,000 years have passed since Sumerian priests first chanted hymns to An in his temple at Uruk. 5,000 years of empires rising and falling, of languages born and dying, of technologies invented and forgotten, of entire civilizations flourishing and collapsing into ruin. And yet these stories endure, preserved by clay tablets that survived when stone monuments crumbled, when papyrus rotted, when oral traditions were forgotten. There is something miraculous in this survival, something that suggests these myths contain truths too essential to be lost, patterns too fundamental to be erased by time's passage. So let us honor the Annunaki not as relics of a superstitious past, but as bearers of wisdom that transcends their historical moment, as maps of the territory we still navigate, as companions on the journey we all must make from birth through life to death, from chaos through order, back to chaos again. Let us remember them not with the reverence of believers, but with the respect due to ancestors who walked this path before us, who faced the same questions we face, who found answers that, while not perfect or final, were genuine and hard-won and worth preserving. The gods sleep now in the depths of history, dreaming their long dream beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. But dreams can be remembered, and in remembering they become real again, not as external powers demanding worship, but as internal forces we recognize and name, not as masters we must serve, but as patterns we can understand and consciously engage. The age of the Anunnaki has passed. The age of understanding what they represented has only begun. And with that understanding, with this knowledge of where we came from and what those who came before us believed about the cosmos and our place within it, we continue the work they started. The endless work of maintaining order against chaos, of creating meaning in a universe that does not automatically provide it, of living conscious lives in the space between heaven and earth that Enlil carved out when he separated his parents and made room for existence itself. Rest well, great gods. Your work is done. Ours continues.